In alchemy, the ether would be the root of consciousness. So consciousness is like the ground of being. But in the modern view, the idea is that consciousness is like a secretion of the brain. Science, in particular quantum theory, has abandoned ether altogether. It has to explain everything in terms of mediating particles.
It seems like the scientific community is making concessions to acknowledge some of these phenomena that they had previously denied and are just throwing the quantum label on them.
Quantum theory led to nuclear theory, and nuclear theory led to the nuclear bomb. There's only about a handful of things that they say are applications or fruits of quantum theory. The rest is all just theoretical. The more I look into it, it does seem like the whole quantum mechanics is actually a smokescreen designed to hide the truth of alchemy. I say ether is the bridge between science and spirituality, and by removing it, they've basically severed that bridge.
Dr. Steve Young in studio. I said that very excitedly. I'm very excited for this. So, probably can't really see all the details on set. Yes, these plants are fake for those who've asked. They are. I had real plants in here, but the studio lights were frying them and I'm not in here enough to water them. So I do unfortunately have fake plants. But the more positive aspect of this set is that I have some really rad books across the set on the shelves. And behind Dr. Steve Young, I have his book, A Fool's Wisdom, which is one of my favorite books I've read in the last 5 or so years. And we had an awesome conversation on this podcast about 2 years ago now, I think. Yeah. And I'd like this to be a continuation of that. So I'll link that one in the show notes for those who've not watched it or listened to it yet. It is a fantastic discussion, I think. But I do have a bone to pick with you. And here's my bone that I have to pick with you. I said heliocentrism at least 10 times during that episode, and not once did you correct me. I was like, I kept on saying heliocentrism, and I'm listening back to it the other day on my flight back from Hawaii. I'm like, what the hell? How did I say that wrong so many times? And you're just sitting there taking it, not correcting me at all, which I appreciate in some respects, but in others, I wish you would have just been like, dude, you're saying it incorrectly. But it's all good. How are you, man?
I'm doing really good, man. Yeah, I've been in the States for the last week. I was at the Elementals Gathering, which is Topher Gardner's event in the Ozarks. And it was absolutely fantastic. It was the first event I've been to where the central theme of the event was alchemy. So all the speakers were talking about alchemy in one way or another. So I felt very much at home because usually I'm the only guy talking about alchemy at the events, you know. So yeah, it was fantastic. And yeah, I got to hang out with lots of legends. And then, yeah, came straight here from there.
Did they have you sit at a table giving ratings on people's talks during their talk, like flashing up cards from 1 to 10?
No,
like,
no.
Dude, that's only like a 5. Chris Crutchfield didn't touch on alchemy enough. Or maybe he said like electron or something like that.
Yeah, no, nothing like that.
How was it being in Central Missouri for the first time?
Yeah, it's a beautiful part of the world, man. I mean, the first thing I noticed was the trees. Mm-hmm. The trees are just magnificent there. You know, it's hard to explain why, but it just like every tree just looked like this microcosm of the universe in and of itself. You know, everyone's so individual, so unique, and just rolling hills full of trees.
The abundance of water in that area too,
yeah,
is phenomenal. I grew up about 3.5 hours, I think, so northwest in the Kansas City area, and it really is a gorgeous area.
Yeah,
I actually grew up going to a lake near the Ozarks called Table Rock Lake, which is more of like a family-friendly lake. There's another lake there that everyone knows about that's called Lake of the Ozarks. That's like the party lake that the wannabe, you know, super millionaires who don't have enough money to afford a yacht off of Miami will put their yacht in the middle of Missouri on a lake. It's like, what the hell are you doing? But it is a gorgeous area.
Yeah.
It is such a beautiful area.
We had all the fireflies or lightning bugs,
yeah,
you know, at night, and the star canopy was beautiful. And yeah, I was just watching all the UFOs and everything. You know, it was just the evenings were magical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting. So I go to Colorado quite a bit in the middle of the mountains where there's not a lot of light pollution. And there's something so fundamentally wrong with the environment that we have created for ourselves as human beings, where we don't have that inherent connection to the stars at night, where we can look up and just see the magnificence of the waters above anymore. There's something so fundamentally wrong with that. And I think it's really I don't know how to say this. Like it's almost like a culmination of our misguided ambitions, in that we have Starlink that's flying across the sky now, that's clouding that even more. Even if you have a lack of light pollution in your area and you can see the stars at night, you also see fucking Starlink flying across a lot of the times too. So it's just another reminder that even in the midst of God's creation, here's the mess that we've created, you know?
Yeah, it disconnects us from, God's handiwork, essentially. And but not just the light pollution, but also the theories that we're taught about the heavens, astrophysics, which was my master's. It kind of just destroys the heavens and, obscures it behind lots of data and just, physics theories that really don't teach you anything about the actual message that's in the heavens,
What was your thesis on?
So, I started with astrophysics, and in my third year, I switched to theoretical physics because I actually found astrophysics to be pretty boring. And the theoretical side was mainly quantum theory. So my master's was on the measurement problem in quantum mechanics, which is this idea that when you measure something, you change it. And so observation, has an effect on the system. So it's kind of a deep philosophical problem. And so that was the subject of my master's.
Where do you stand with that now, like on the observer effect? Because I know a lot of people will refer to like the double slit experiment and some experiments, quote unquote experiments like that. But what is your opinion on like human observation changing the actual outcomes in physical reality?
I think it happens in the perspective of life. With human bodies, right? But we're taught about, when physics talks about bodies, they're talking about particles, these infinitesimal particles. But a lot of the things in quantum theory actually kind of make sense when you take it to the level of human bodies. So say entanglement, for example. So they say particles will become entangled if they interact and then they go their separate ways. They will remain sort of in some kind of contact, such that if you observe one, it will have an effect on the other. Now, I don't think there's any real evidence of that. There's plenty of claims around it. But in the human world, people do become entangled when they interact, right? So, even just a brief interaction where you get to know somebody, or, at the extreme level, say two people have sexual intercourse, their lives become entangled in a way that affects them for a long, long time. And so I see a lot of these ideas are kind of coming from this level, the level of life, but then it's being like encoded into the theory of physics in some way, by in the description of these particles.
Do you think it's exclusive to human beings though, or do you think it's like a fundamental aspect of reality? And the reason I say that is like the example is where Veda Austin will have someone who's thousands of miles away think of something specific with the intention to project it onto the water that she has in the petri dish near her. She freezes it, and it clearly displays an image of what that individual is thinking about, unbeknownst to her. For example, she had a friend in the U.S. while she's in New Zealand at the time think of something, and she freezes the water, and in the imagery of the water is pretty clearly some type of bird or pheasant or duck or something like this. And it turns out her friend was actually thinking about the pheasant hunt or duck hunt that he was about to go on sometime in the following days. So it's like there are things like that. And then other examples, and I don't remember the exact details of this, but something like if you take human blood and separate it from the human being and put it some location that's far away from that individual and do something to them, it also affects their blood, some substantial amount of distance away.
Yeah, so, in the case of the water freezing, so had the person who was far away, had they interacted with the water in a physical
physically,
way?
no.
Right, so that wouldn't be entanglement then, that would be sort of a remote, remote viewing, but remote influence.
Yeah.
The thing is, a lot of these things can be explained with ether.
Yeah.
That we're inside of a medium and that signals can be transmitted through the medium. But because science, in particular quantum theory, has abandoned ether altogether, it has to explain everything in terms of mediating particles. I think it's safe to say that this person thousands of miles away wasn't like sending particles to Veda Austin's water sample because, there's just no evidence for anything like that. But with the right intention, with the focus on it remotely, the signal can be transmitted through the ether. and have a measurable effect.
Yeah, I feel like ether makes so much more sense of all the things that people are referring to as quote unquote quantum phenomena. I was thinking about this on the drive over here, is that as a lot of people in the health, truth, and freedom space, I guess you could just say a lot of people that are becoming skeptical of modern science and are turning towards various, dare I say, ancient spiritual and esoteric traditions. It seems like the scientific community is making concessions to acknowledge some of these phenomena that they had previously denied, and are just throwing the quantum label on them, almost like capturing the minds of a lot of the people who are turning away from science and saying, no, there's still some validity. We are acknowledging what you're saying. It's all quantum. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, every time someone says quantum, I cringe.
Yeah,
you know, it's just,
dude. I actually send him your videos. That's the first thing that I do.
But in fairness, I think actually when most people, when they use the word quantum to describe something, they actually mean ether, right?
Yeah.
It's the reason they're saying quantum is because quantum theory has been put up in place of ether.
Yeah.
So a lot of the things that can be explained quite easily if you have a medium like that we're all within, these have been sort of explained away in quantum terms. So I think people are really looking for the ether when they say quantum. They're sort of reaching for the ether, but quantum's been sort of put up in its place.
Yeah. Actually, I want to ask this first. What are the foundational problems with quantum physics? Because we touched on this a little bit in our last episode, but I really, really want to unpack this, because I could see where someone listening to this right now, well, it's like, okay, well, whether you say quantum or ether, what does it really matter? And for me, it matters greatly. One, because what is true matters, but I also know that quantum is based ultimately in the idea of these bouncing ball particles that are totally theoretical, never proven to exist, which is ultimately rooted in materialism itself, which is also problematic. But I struggle to articulate exactly why it's so problematic to throw quantum on everything when ether is a much better explanation, much easier explanation. It makes sense of the things that quantum physics tries to throw complex math at and explain it that way, where it becomes so mindless and so confusing that people are like, oh, I just can't explain it. So these scientists must know what they're doing. I'm just not smart enough to understand it. But I still struggle to articulate like why it's so problematic. So could you just start with explaining the problems with quantum physics?
Well,
I know that's a big question too.
Sure, yeah, but I mean, before quantum physics, I mean, ether was, the established mainstream view of science, like Lord Kelvin, Maxwell, Descartes, various others, these great physicists that were prior to the 19th century.
Even Isaac Newton, right?
Yeah. I mean, Isaac Newton talked about a spirit filling all of space.
And Albert Einstein, by the way, too, which is interesting.
Yeah.
As many problems there are with Albert Einstein, he ultimately admitted that there are many problems in physics if we take ether out of the equation.
Yeah.
Something to that effect.
But yeah, so when I first started looking back over my quantum training and trying to figure out, what was going on there, the first thing I looked at was what are the fruits? Right, what are the fruits of this theory? Because it's 100 years old. We're told it's like the greatest, most intellectual achievement of mankind. And, well, it must have produced something, right? All that work, all that theory must lead to something. And, of course, when you start looking into that, well, okay, so quantum theory led to nuclear theory, and nuclear theory led to the nuclear bomb. And so that's the first thing they tell you that came about as a fruit of quantum theory. Now, a nuclear bomb, of course, is not a fruit.
I have some questions related to that too, so let's get into that.
But then they throw in some other things, like they talk about, they say the laser or the, atomic clocks and things like this. But again, all of that stuff I found could be explained in non-quantum terms when I looked at it. So, there's only about a handful of things that they say are applications or fruits of quantum theory. The rest is all just theoretical stuff, claims of, papers claiming to have done this and that, but things that had never been really reproduced. So that was the first sign that there was just something going on here, because all this effort in this domain of quantum theory has not really produced anything good for humanity. So that was the first sort of red flag. And then Well, it's kind of encoded at its fundamental level with the philosophy of materialism, which is really the idea that there are no spiritual substances, so no spirit, no soul, no God. Everything is just matter. But then on top of that, other sort of philosophical or belief systems kind of come out from this. Things like solipsism, the idea that everything is in your mind or in your imagination. There's only one mind, and that's yours, and everything else is just sort of a projection of that. Things like the Schrodinger's cat paradox is one example of that.
What's that one?
So it's this idea that, if there's a cat in a box with a quantum device and there's a radioactive decay, and you don't know whether the cat is dead or alive, so they say it's in this sort of superposition of dead and alive at the same time. And it's, I think Schrodinger came up with it as a joke, so I heard, but, it's taught as a serious sort of philosophical problem. But it just puts this out, because what's actually happening, if that experiment was done, of course the cat is not half dead and half alive, or it's not in some superposition. It's just like, you're talking about your knowledge. Yeah. You're just saying you don't have knowledge of whether it's this or that, but that doesn't mean it's both at the same time. No. So again, it feeds into this idea that like reality is only real because you observe it, because it's a projection of your mind. But other than that, it can be in this weird sort of quantum, state where nothing is fully real. And I just find it's quite isolating. It puts you into this sort of spiritual cul-de-sac. The more you go down these theories, it leads you away from God and leads you into this sort of dangerous state of mind, I think.
Yeah, I feel like it's a godless, I think I said something like this on our last podcast. It's like a godless way to explain phenomena that are primarily driven by God at the end of the day.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. So when people are saying, like, applying the word quantum to things, again, you and I can both get what they're probably meaning. They're talking about ether without understanding that it's like etheric phenomena that they're referring to, and ultimately like God driving all things, God being the mover that moves through the ether, if you will. But I don't know, like in your mind, why is it so problematic? Is it because without knowing, like unwittingly, they're referring back to quantum physics or lending credence to quantum physics without knowing it?
Yeah, I mean, they're lending credence to it, and I think often they don't fully understand what they're talking about. Obviously I spent, 8 years studying quantum theory and reading all the books and stuff, but usually the people I hear invoking quantum theory have never studied it, in that level of depth. But I think, there's this association with consciousness, which again, when you come back to the ether, so in alchemy, the ether would be the root of consciousness. So consciousness is like the ground of being. But in the modern view, based on quantum theory and atomism, the idea is that consciousness is like a secretion of the brain, or like an epiphenomenon of the brain, they call it. So they're trying to explain everything with the particles being the main sort of creative force. But, it all just makes so much more sense when you realize we're in a medium. We're like the fish that don't know they're in water. And the ether can create vortices, and there's currents and flows, and signals can be transmitted through them. I mean, this is another thing. So if there's no ether, then all signals have to be transmitted with particles. Yeah. So they even say that light is a particle.
I know.
In quantum
I
theory.
still struggle when people say, for example, like biophotons, or just photons in general, but especially like as it applies to the human body, like this helps with biophoton production inside your bodies. That's like a lot of claims surrounding some products and things like this that I've used myself in some cases, like red light therapy and things like this, that have beneficial impact in my experience, but they invoke these words, and it becomes problematic because like I don't know what else to say aside from something like biophoton production. I guess you could just say it's like a light phenomena that we don't know.
Yes, well, I mean, a photon, they say is considered to be a particle or a packet of light. Yeah. And that does exist, but it's just pulsed waves. If a wave is pulsing, then it's coming out in small packets, and then but a photon is more than that. It's because it's based on this idea of wave-particle duality, which again, I don't, think is real.
Can we get into that a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah. So, in wave-particle duality, we have there's the double-slit experiment, which is supposedly proves this, where if you fire a light beam through two slits which are closely spaced, you get this interference pattern. You've seen this kind of thing where, you get bands of light of different intensity coming out from the two slits. It's because when the light enters the slit and comes out the other end, it diverts. And so you have two diverting light beams and they overlap and create this pattern. Now, they say that they've done this experiment with electrons, with like just firing one electron at a time towards the slits. And then the electron goes, well, either through the slits, one or the other, or something happens when the electron gets to the slit, but then it produces the same pattern over time. Now, again, this has not been satisfactorily proven. There's papers about it, but you won't find like a video of the phenomena, like a demonstration of it.
They don't really describe the methods.
Yeah, it's kind of a trust me, bro.
It's so interesting,
sort of
man. It's
situation.
so interesting because it applies to all the germ-related quote-unquote research as well.
Yeah.
It's like the details are in the methods, and they're either, if you go look at the methods, it's like, how are you making the claims that you're making based on this procedure that you followed? Or sometimes you can't even find the true methods. You have to go dig in another supplementary material. Sometimes you can't find the supplementary paper based on the claims that they're making. I'm like, that's the most important part, the actual procedure that you followed in order to make the claims that you're making right now.
Yeah. Yeah, and they come up with all sorts of stuff to explain how electrons can do this, and they say things like they interfere with themselves through time. They're like, because they're coming through like one at a time, like bullets, but somehow they manage to interfere with each other, even though it's one after another, whereas the light interferes because it's like two beams coming out at the same time. But how could an electron interfere with itself if they're coming out like 1 second apart? It doesn't make any sense at all. And so it leads to all these sort of paradoxes and just sort of wild claims about the nature of the electron, which, again, when you go looking for the proof, it's just not there.
Would you say that a sufficient way to describe what they call an electron or a neutron or a proton or any of these supposed particles, especially ones that are like on the, I guess you could say, electrical side of things, the light side of things, is that it's a concentration of energy within a certain space that they are falsely assuming is a distinct particle?
Yeah, because with the proton, neutron, and electron, you have obviously positive, neutral, and negative.
Yeah.
And we know that that's real. You can have a positively charged terminal, a negatively charged terminal, and neutral. And that's all well and good. But sort of objectifying positivity into a single material object, it's just not there. I mean, these point charges that they talk about in physics, they get up on the blackboard and they're like, here's a point charge Q and another point charge Q, and they're this distance apart, and this happens. There's no point charge Q. It doesn't exist. There are not like, single physical objects that just emit positive charge eternally. They haven't been isolated.
This is the thing that I hear from people. There's two things. Is one, well, we use the idea of electrons and protons in our equations that help us run electrical circuits and things like this, all of electricity. So how can you possibly say that they don't exist? That's the one thing. I'd love to hear your response to that. And then the second thing that I hear is when I talk about virology and the lack of evidence for viruses, people will say, well, do you believe electrons exist? Because we use them every day. What are your thoughts on those two statements?
Yeah, I mean, with the well, first of all, it's supposed to be a piece of material, like a material object. So, just like with viruses, a material object you should be able to isolate and contain.
Yeah.
And so if electricity is made...
At least if that's your claim. Like, if that is your assertion, then show me the evidence for your assertion.
Yeah, show
like
me
the direct evidence.
A bucket of electrons.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Exactly.
I'd love to see it, but it doesn't exist. I mean, electricity is always in motion.
Yeah.
Right. It's like not something that can just be contained like a material object. It can't be held in the hands. And even in cases with particle accelerators like CERN and stuff, where they say that they have a beam of protons, and I'd wondered like how did they get protons? When you actually look into it, it's just hydrogen gas, which has been electrified. And they call it protons, right? It's like electrified hydrogen gas or hydrogen plasma. And, it can be manipulated with magnetic fields and stuff, but, they'll say that it's protons. but it's electrified hydrogen gas. Let's just talk in real terms rather than invoking these things that we haven't never proven. So a lot of these things, they can just be understood in real terms much better than going into the quantum realm and trying to explain it that way.
In one of your videos that you put out recently, you were talking about, I forget the two substances, the supposedly distinct substances on the periodic table of elements, and I know there's a lot of problems with that, but you're talking about how if you just add one proton to one of the substances, it becomes another substance. And my mind immediately went to, couldn't you just say that they're manipulating a certain substance which is already man-made with a shit ton of positive charge in some way, because that's what we're talking about with protons in air quotes, and then it is basically doing transmutation from one thing to another thing because they're adding so much positive charge to it.
Yeah, so on the periodic table, the first is hydrogen, then helium, and then lithium.
Yeah.
And so the number on the periodic table is the number of protons in the nucleus. So hydrogen 1, helium 2, lithium 3. So then the idea is that helium, which is this sort of invisible gas that pulls upwards, if it has a proton added to it, it's then going to become lithium.
Yes.
Which is like this soft metal which is derived from rocks.
Yeah.
And they're just so far apart. And I've never seen that experiment done. You're going to fire some protons into some helium.
Okay, so even so, they've
lithium.
never been able to actually demonstrate that it's just one proton away from becoming a completely different substance.
No, so that would be transmutation.
Yeah, so that's what I was getting at. Yeah. So I guess I had wrongly assumed, and of course I should have assumed otherwise because they make up so many claims regarding things that they've never actually demonstrated. But if they had demonstrated that adding one quote unquote proton to this substance, it turns it into another substance, that's immediately where my mind went. It's just like, oh, they're adding a shit ton of positive charge to this, which is ultimately transmutation of elements is what they're doing at the end of the day.
Yeah. And of course,
but again, if they haven't done it at all, then it's like, okay, then how can they possibly make that claim that it's just one proton away from being a completely different substance?
Yeah, well, with the periodic table, I remember learning about this in chemistry. They tell you that transmutation is either not possible or requires so much energy and is so costly that it's just not worth doing. And so the periodic table shows all these substances as separate, distinct types of atoms, but it's in the alchemical sense, you would think of the substances as distinct sets of properties. Transmutation then is changing the properties of a substance through the application of fire or through the 7 alchemical steps. And transmutation, again, prior to Einstein and the whole 20th century physics, transmutation was a known thing. It was, mainstream, accepted, established science. So, all this old world stuff that everyone's talking about, all that old world was made without atomic theory, without quantum theory, without relativity, without any of this stuff that we're told is so great. The entire old world was constructed with old science, and it's just clearly a superior way of looking at things.
Quick shout out to Podigy, the team that we brought on to produce our podcast. We started working with them last year, and the difference was immediate. Way less stress on the back end for us with podcast production, and our YouTube has grown significantly since bringing on Podigy. If you're already running a podcast and looking to boost your production value, or if you're thinking about starting a podcast, I highly recommend working with Podigy. If you check the show notes, there's an assessment that Podigy has put together to give you specific steps to take to grow your own podcast. And that's whether you're just getting started or looking to take your current podcast to the next level. Each month, they're giving away a strategy call with their founder, Justin Moore, and he is incredibly talented and incredibly smart, and he really knows how to grow a podcast from the ground up. So if you're interested in working with Podigy, just head to the show notes and take the assessment. And if you decide to work with them, just mention AlexEc in the way forward, and they'll give you a nice little deal. I was looking into this before this podcast too, on some accepted examples of transmutation according to quote unquote modern science that they can't make sense of. And I don't know if we discussed this before, but I know I discussed it with Mike Wilkerson during our podcast. But the one example where in a chicken's diet, there's not a sufficient amount of calcium to make sense of how much calcium is inside an egg that a chicken produces. And modern science cannot figure out how that happens, but that's a clear example of biological transmutation. And then, of course, most of modern science would reject this idea, but pleomorphism, that's another example of transmutation. Bacteria morphing into fungus, back into a bacteria, back into a somatid or a precursor or microzyme or whatever you want to call it. And then there's examples of bacteria and algae. Some studies claim that certain bacteria can transmute elements to handle environmental stressors. One of the most modern, quote unquote, unexplained claims comes from researchers basically taking bacteria like Bacillus subtilis, I think is how you pronounce it, and they grow it in a medium, and it basically converts manganese into iron without any external input whatsoever in the culture. And that's another example of transmutation. So it's weird that they deny that it is a real thing in many respects, while they also acknowledge that it is a real fundamental aspect of what happens in reality that they can't explain.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, the biological system is doing transmutation on many different levels. And, when you consider that it's just a case of changing the properties, so that the balance of elements within the substance. In alchemy, all substances are said to contain the four elements in differing proportions. So if the idea that your biology is creating new types of atoms or changing one atom into another is kind of hard to explain. But taking a substance and altering its balance of elements, maybe taking some of the fire out of it or adding more fire into it, this kind of thing can just change the properties of the substance to, something else. So there's really only one substance, and that is earth. So it's earth and water,
So you've talked on recent videos about basically showing two oppositional ways to look at things. And that's one way is through atomism, and the other way is basically through the idea that ether is the primary substrate in which all things arise. And I want to talk about that a little bit, but I first want you to break down the problems with the idea of atoms. And the reason I want to go there, again, my audience overwhelmingly on the same page. I'm in the quote unquote health, freedom, truth, consciousness space. That's what my podcast, that's the main audience. And there's still a lot of people who are talking about atoms as if they're real things. Again, talking about electrons, protons, neutrons, and things like this as if they're real things. And I just want you to share the problems with the idea that there are such thing as atoms to start.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're fundamentally out of reach. Right, you can't see them, can't isolate them. So when you start explaining, and this is about explanations. I'm criticizing of the language that people use in their explanations when they invoke things that nobody can actually relate to. Now, okay, you could say we can relate to atoms because we got taught about them in school or whatever, but it's just not. The ether, on the other hand, is something that is actually empowering and something you can kind of connect with on a real level. Whereas with atoms, they're just so far away, down there in the depths of the smallest scale of the universe. It's just not a helpful explanation. There's nothing you can do with it.
Yeah, can we talk a little bit about, I don't know how much you've gone into this. I'd imagine at least a little bit, and it's okay if you don't remember the exact details, but the claimed evidence of atoms. Because with virology, I'm sure oftentimes people who deny the existence or say there's no evidence for atoms are met with, well, how do you explain the millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars of research that has gone into atoms and researching things at the quote unquote atomic level? How do you explain these various experiments that people probably cite? I haven't looked into this myself, so I don't really know. It just made sense after I'd already looked into virology and the problems there, that if atoms are claimed to be smaller than what viruses are, and they can't even demonstrate the existence of these things. But on the other hand, there are chemists who claim to isolate things that are smaller than viruses, so maybe it can be done to actually purify and isolate things. But all that to say, what are the claimed experiments that have been done to demonstrate the idea that atoms actually exist as discrete entities, and what are the problems with them, if you remember it? If not, that's all good.
Well, in atomic and nuclear physics, I mean, the way that they test some of these theories is by, shooting light beams at substances and then observing where the light goes after it hits that substance. So it's called a cross-section, a reaction cross-section. So you come up with a theory of the structure of the substance, and then you fire the light at it, and then it goes off in different directions. And based on the angles of the light scattering, you can make some assumptions about the structure that you're looking at. So there is structure within matter, and that structure can be probed by light of different wavelengths. So when you use the wavelength of the light interacts with structures that are about the same size as the wavelength.
Okay.
So there is, of course, structure within matter, and that's what you're observing is the structure. But what I found in my PhD, because I was looking at a particular reaction, it was lithium actually, so it was a light beam incident on a sample of lithium, and then I was basically developed the theory to predict where the light beam would go after it hits the lithium. And what I realized is that, and it was successful, matched the experiment, but there was nothing about any particles in the theory.
Yeah,
it was all about waves. So the lithium was modeled by adding waveforms together. So it's called a Fourier transform, where you take a bunch of different waves and you add them together to create a new type of wave. So the lithium itself was modeled as a wave, and the light beam itself was modeled as wave, and then you get a wave pattern coming out. So there was just nothing about particles needed to actually explain the phenomenon.
God dang, man. That is so wild. These are some of, I feel like Theo Von right now, where I'm struggling to explain this from my perspective, what's in my mind right now. But so it is literally them just taking this preconceived idea of these things that have never been demonstrated to exist and overlaying them over the top of real phenomena that is sometimes repeatable and observable, and attributing the cause of said phenomena to be these particles that have never been demonstrated to exist. Is that accurate?
Yeah, the particles are in the human mind.
Yeah.
Right. But in the real life situation, you have a substance and you have a light beam, and the substance structure can be modeled by adding waveforms together. So it's an entirely wave-based theory when you actually get down to the nuts and bolts of making the predictions. But it's talked about because they'll have certain energies will come out. So certain light beams that come out from the reaction will have a certain energy value, and then they will attribute that energy to a particular particle, let's say. But they're not observing the particle, they're just measuring the energy.
That is so crazy to me, man. That's literally the foundational research on particles.
That's the sort of practical experimental side of it. But, most people who are working in atomic theory and nuclear theory are just running computer simulations.
Yeah.
There's departments all over the world. They run simulations. They come up with theories, and it's all basically on paper. But in the experimental side, when they're actually doing these experiments, they use light beams and substances and detectors all around it, and it picks up, light at different angles, and then that's all interpreted in a sort of particle-based model.
God dang, man, that is so wild to me. And it's not surprising, but it's just wild to hear that. Because it's no different than what happens with virology and so-called infectious disease research. And then you have epidemiologists who are just doing modeling based on that preconceived idea.
Yeah, it's like the virus is in their head, and they're projecting it onto the results, right? Because it's the sort of the language of which they're interpreting the results.
That is so wild, man. What do you think is actually happening at CERN?
Well, I did a video about this recently, and I was quite surprised with where it took me. I mean, it's hard to know what they're really doing there, but again, it was a case of looking to the fruits. I started looking into all their press releases and seeing the kind of things that they're claiming, and it's all very sort of wishy-washy stuff. Like they'll talk about, the first interaction between these exotic particles was witnessed and this kind of thing. And actually, one of their press releases, they claimed to turn lead into gold.
Mm-hmm. I saw you talk about this in the video. It was an infinitesimally small amount of gold that's not even useful, and millions of funding was poured into it, and there's nothing useful out of it.
Yeah, it was 29 picograms. They even said it's trillions of times less than what would be required to make a piece of jewelry. But what's so absurd about that is that it would cost billions, billions of euros to do this experiment, with the largest machine in the world. And they're like, all they can produce is this, a few atoms of gold. And they sort of, it seemed like it was a bit of a mockery of alchemy, to be honest, because they said, well, the dream of the alchemists may be true, but, or the dreams of riches have been dashed, something like that. Of course, the alchemists weren't dreaming of riches either, but, so the idea that you would spend all that money to make just a few atoms of gold is really quite absurd, and I think it just shows you how they're just not producing anything good with all this tech and all this machinery. But in terms of what's actually going on there, well, I mean, there's a lot of occultism that it seems, so they have this statue of Shiva, the destroyer, like right at the sort of entrance, like outside the CERN hotel. It has its own hotel, right? So it's not just a lab, it's actually a whole village sort of complex. I would say even a temple complex.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and so I didn't really know much about Shiva, but Shiva the destroyer is a sacrificial deity, right? So the idea being that you sacrifice something, sacrifice life or sacrifice energy for cosmic knowledge. And, there's that famous video of a sacrificial ritual in front of the Shiva statue at CERN.
That video is so disturbing, bro. Like, it is so disturbing.
Yeah.
It is so overtly disturbing, too.
Yeah.
That's the part that, like, how can anyone, quote unquote, that's a normie that believes in quote unquote science, he's quote unquote so much in this podcast. We need to find new terms to describe things. But how can anyone watch that video and not be like, yeah, something is really fucked up with that? Like, something, whatever they're doing there, I want no part in that. We should not be giving any funding towards it. Like, it's fucked.
Yeah,
you know what I mean, man? Like, watching that video is like, this almost seems like a satire. This seems like a comedy because it is so overtly, ritualistically evil and gross.
Yeah.
In the video, like, it's horrible.
Yeah, and they have you believe that it's just a bunch of physics students having a laugh, after a few beers.
Bad. It's so bad.
Yeah. And, well, I mean, it's interesting, what occurs in that ritual because, it looks to me like it's a group of men in black robes and a woman in white robes. And, when you just look at the symbolism of, like, the black and white, it's like darkness and light, and it's the light that's being sacrificed. And then when you look at, like, how much money CERN gets and how much
do they get?
I think it's, I can't remember the exact number, several billion a year from like 23 different countries.
Than NASA then.
Yeah. And so they are actually sacrificing money. They're sacrificing energy, uses more energy than the city of Geneva. And they're sacrificing intelligence because they have thousands of highly trained, intelligent people who, a lot of them presumably got into it for the right reasons. They want to understand nature. But they're then, put into these labs and they're running simulations and crunching data and, doing all this kind of stuff, but they're not producing anything good for humanity. So the whole thing sort of seems like this kind of, sacrificial lab where, they're seeking cosmic knowledge, but they're sacrificing all this stuff in order to do it. And, one of the surprising things that I discovered at the time was CERN, the word CERN is the root of Cernunnos, which is this Celtic deity, like god of the underworld, like guardian of the threshold. And there's this old image of Cernunnos, who's this horned deity. He's got like antlers and he's holding this thing, like it looks like a bracelet. It's twisted metal with like two balls on the end. And, it struck me that's a torque. That's what they're called, torques. So it's like conductors. It's usually gold, twisted wires with these two terminals on the end. It looked like a tensor ring.
Wow.
And I realized that that's actually what the CERN LHC is. It's like a giant tensor ring because it has twisted conducting, like superconducting magnets.
Wow.
And it has terminals with a discharge gap, which is where they put the detectors, right, to basically detect what happens when the energy discharges. So there's this ancient image of this horned god. He's got a torque in his hand, he's got a torque around his neck, and then torques around his antlers as well. And yeah, it seemed like they've actually made this lab in the image of this pagan Celtic deity called Cernunnos, who happens to be a local deity to that specific region of Europe.
Whoa.
As well. So it's because CERN is like right on the border between France and Switzerland. And that's another interesting thing because it's it's like half the lab is in Switzerland, half the lab is in France. And they say that borders are these kind of liminal spaces where, if you're doing something that's perhaps legally ambiguous or occult in some way, it's like you're neither Switzerland nor France are fully responsible for what goes on in there.
That's so interesting, man.
Yeah.
Wow. With the claim that, correct me if I'm wrong on this, that CERN has discovered the quote-unquote God particle. Have you looked into what was actually done with that? And is it CERN that it claims to have discovered the God particle?
Yeah, so it won the Nobel Prize in 2013, I think.
Okay.
And I mean, look, I've never seen any evidence that they discovered the God particle, but it's part of their press release, and it's obviously a big deal for them. But the idea of the God particle is that it's a particle that is able to give mass to other particles. So mass, of course, is physicality, physical existence. So it's like essentially, so that's why they call it the God particle, because it gives life. It gives physicality to other particles, which is just a very strange concept in itself. Like how, what were the other particles before they received the gift of life from the God particle? But it's actually, they've really just inverted alchemy in a way, because in alchemy you have this tetractys, this thing is like you have the Godhead, which then splits. So it's at 1, 2, 3, 4. You have the Godhead splits into 2, which is the sun and the moon, which are the two primary luminaries in creation. And then you get into the salt, sulfur, and mercury, and then into the 4 elements, fire, earth, air, and water. Well, in particle physics, they've inverted that. They have the God particle at the top, and then the first 2 fundamental particles are the quark and the lepton. Now, interestingly, the word lepton just means small stuff. It comes from the Greek lepta, meaning small or tiny. And then quark is a German word. It's a colloquialism meaning nonsense or triviality. Yeah. So there's this sort of idea that like the first thing the God particle produces is small stuff and nonsense. And then the quark and the lepton are said to be the constituents of protons, neutrons, and electrons. So you then, from the quark and the lepton, you have the proton, neutron, and electron, positive, negative, and neutral. And then from the constituents of matter, you then get the 4 states of matter, which is solid, liquid, gas, and plasma, which correspond with earth, air, fire, and water. So the more I look into it, it does seem like the whole quantum mechanics is actually a smokescreen designed to hide the truth of alchemy. But because it's like an inversion, if you know what you're looking at, you can actually learn about alchemy by looking at quantum physics, which is like this shadow of it in some way. So, it's very interesting. I think this is what a lot of like when people have powerful knowledge that they're trying to hide, it's like they present the public with this kind of inverted, like watered down version of it. It's not like a complete fabrication. It is related to what it is they're trying to hide.
Because it's pinging something intuitively in people where they're like, there's something there. So it makes it more alluring and it makes you pay attention a little bit more if you don't have the understanding of the fuckery of scientism that you and I and many of the people who are listening to this have. It pings that intuition inside you. There's something about this that is true, but I don't know what it is. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
One thing related to atoms that I did want to discuss though too was the idea that atoms are mostly quote unquote empty space. I know I'm throwing a lot at you, like how did they discover that? Like expecting you to remember the exact details of these supposed experiments. But how did they come to that determination if they've never demonstrated that atoms are an actual discrete thing, that atoms are overwhelmingly quote unquote empty space? Is it because of these mathematical equations that they have developed based on the idea of the existence of atoms and a problem with mass related to the composition of the atoms? How did they come up with this claim?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, that's a fairly modern claim. I only started hearing it maybe in the last 20 years or so, but it's just the quantum theory has kind of led to that because it's so sort of ambiguous. But the original theories of the atom was there was 100% solid stuff
Yeah.
Right. So it went from 100% solid stuff to 99.999% empty space, which is a heck of a transition, and we're supposed to believe that's all progress, right? It's like the ancients had a primitive view of atoms. And
does it relate to dark matter at all, by the way?
Well, dark matter would relate to the ether.
No.
I would say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Because
what I meant in that, like, from my understanding, the reason they came up with dark matter was because there was a problem with mass that was in their equations that was unaccounted for. They couldn't figure out where this mass was coming from. So likewise, when it comes to the subatomic level, figuring out what's inside a quote unquote atom, they are like, oh, it must just be empty space inside of these atoms. You see what I'm saying there?
Yeah, well, I mean, the dark matter thing originated from, cosmology.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
Yeah, and this idea that they calculated the mass of the universe.
Yeah, right. Which is insane.
The answer came out wrong. so they're like, well, there must be some other matter that we can't see that's creating gravity in the universe because, matter is said to be the source of gravity. So, I mean, the hubris involved in that kind of thing, we calculated the mass of the universe and it turned out wrong. It's like, how do you know what it is in the first place?
Right.
It's kind of, it's pretty crazy. But so it's more, the dark matter thing is more of a cosmic thing more than an atomic physics thing specifically. Yeah. But I guess the idea would be that there's, matter all around us that we can't see or detect, which again leans into the ether.
Right.
Yeah.
So the question that I would have then, because you brought up like, where's the fruits of any of this related to quantum theory, related to particle physics and things like this, is on the flip side of that, my question would be, where is the fruits of the understanding of ether? And I ask that while also acknowledging that from my perspective, the moment that I found out about ether like 5-6 years ago, obviously I'd heard about it before that, but I never knew exactly what people meant when they said ether. It just made so much more sense of these various direct experiences that I'd had in my own life that I could not explain. That you could call them synchronicities. A lot of, materialists would just call them coincidences, chance happenings, but it's like, no. If there is a medium that exists between all things, if there are a lot of electromagnetic properties inherent to us, inherent to all of nature, and there are signals and fields and frequencies that are overlapping constantly, a lot of this now makes sense to me. It was a breath of fresh air learning about it. So from my own direct experience, I guess you could say that is the fruits of understanding ether. But from I guess you could say, perspective of inventing things, innovating in reality, while also, again, acknowledging this piece that a lot of the times that people have innovated and made things that we could say are related to etheric phenomena, many of them have been offed, or their technology has been taken and destroyed, or it happened sometime in the past and you have to find these obscure manuscripts because most of that history has been entirely erased. But with those two things as context, what are the fruits of the idea that ether is a better, more a sufficient way to describe these phenomena over atomism?
Well, again, the old world is, a lot of people who are studying the old world, in particular, the cathedrals and, their structure and their ability to harness energy from the ether, as it were. That seems to be, it seems like the old world was created on this basis, but then come the 20th century, that got, put out of science and, everything's been explained in terms of quantum and atoms, and we've just lost a lot of that understanding from those early days. But I think a lot of it ties into free energy, because if we're in a medium that is constantly moving, like you think water, for example, if you're in a river and the river's flowing, there's a constant source of energy there to tap into. You get free energy from the river. So in the same way, you can get free energy from the ether because it's always moving around us. So free energy is one of those things that, one of the first things you get taught in physics. No such thing as free energy, right? So I think the fruits of etheric understanding were really in the past. And maybe people are doing things today. I look at a lot of these skyscrapers, and I'm thinking they must be pulling in energy from
Something,
the ether.
dude.
Like all those skyscrapers in New York, you're telling me they're all powering off the same grid and the same like power stations and everything. That would be a bit of a waste.
Right.
Because they're way up high.
Yeah, and they'll
They can
claim
pull
like the
energy.
spires are there to ground any of the lightning strikes that happen, so they don't fry any of the electronics inside the buildings and things like this.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know if I buy that.
Yeah, I think there may be like a secret, secret architecture which is going on, which is just not shared with the public, but is inside a lot of these buildings, and we're just not privy to it.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah, and again, like I can't help but think of even friends that I have who trained underneath some doctors who are helping people heal from a variety of things. And these are people that you and I both know. I'm just not going to say their names because obvious reasons, but that weren't even working with things related to ether, but we're just helping people heal from a variety of things that were supposedly incurable and were suddenly killed or suddenly died from like a heart attack when they were in perfect health and things like this. And it's like, it brings up a lot of questions related to the technologies that have been supposedly created over the past 100, 200 years where people mysteriously vanished or their stuff was confiscated by the government and things like this. Like, I think that actually does happen.
Yeah, and I think ether provides an explanation of things like prayer, which again is very hard. In science, of course, prayer doesn't work, doesn't exist, it's a waste of time and so on. But as you well know, prayer does work.
Yeah,
and I've had my prayers answered, sometimes really quickly in the past. And so, again, if you have a conscious medium, which we're all a part of, then, your prayer, even if it's loud or even if it's quiet, is still going to be received and heard by the ether. And then the ether being everywhere all at once is then in a position to act on that in miraculous ways. So, it's I say ether is like the science, is the bridge between science and spirituality.
Yeah.
And by removing it, they've basically severed that bridge and condemned everyone to a materialistic worldview.
So true, man. Oh my gosh. That's a really cool way to look at it. Do you think that ether is synonymous with the field of consciousness, or that the field of consciousness is within ether? Like, how do you look at ether and consciousness together?
Yeah, I think it's connected. I think if it's a single medium which pervades all space and just it has awareness of itself, and that's just there, and we can't explain why it does or how it does, but I think in order for everything that, all of creation to have come from that, there is this. And so in our body, for example, ether would be the part of us that is sort of controlling the body, is aware of the body, that feels the pain or feels the love. The observer that is feeling and sensing everything is actually the ether. And the body is sort of the apparatus or the tool through which the ether can express and interact in the world.
So it's like ether is synonymous with the field of consciousness, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
And, another thing, it helps to understand gravity. So another big one in gravity, because the theory of gravity is actually the basis, the linchpin of the entire model of the cosmos. Like distances to the stars and planets, all this kind of thing is all calculated with this theory of gravity. Now, what I realized with gravity is that, we're told about the apple falling from the tree. And then Newton had this brainwave where he realized, oh, yes, this must mean mass attracts mass and so on. But apples do fall from trees, but apples don't attract other apples, right? And this is the thing. It's like things do fall to the ground, but Newton generalized that and said, well, that must mean all mass attracts all other mass. But there's no horizontal gravity. Right, and sometimes people will say, well, it's because of friction, that balls don't roll towards each other on the floor and stuff. But you can even take friction out of the equation if you consider like a bunch of apples in some water, right? Then because they've all got mass, they should ultimately draw towards each other and then like form a clump. But like it just doesn't happen. Mass doesn't attract mass, but things do fall. And I think ether explains this because we have there's a flow of ether coming from heaven down to earth. And again, if you think of it like a current in a river, if let's say you're sitting in a river, you're in your floaty and you're floating down the river and there's a leaf next to you, right? You and the leaf are going to float down the river at the same rate because you're both being carried by the current.
Yeah.
It doesn't actually matter that you're heavier and the leaf is lighter. You both move at the same speed because you're moving in the current of the water. So similarly, and they talk about this in physics, is that if you drop a bowling ball and a feather at the same time in a vacuum, they both fall at the exact same rate. Now, if gravity were correct, then the bowling ball should fall faster than the feather because it's got more mass and therefore more force, more acceleration. But they both fall at the exact same speed. So that suggests to me that they're actually being moved in a current.
Interesting.
And, this is just the toroidal field idea, right? Where, energy is coming down from above, but also going up as well. So you have the earth and the water go down and the air and the fire go up. So there's like simultaneously two currents, one lifting things up, levity, and one pulling things down. Within the human body, when we're alive, we have the four elements within us. We can climb mountains, let's say. We can lift ourselves up, we can climb mountains. But it's because the fire and the air are in us, we can pull ourselves up. But when we die, the fire and the air leaves the body, and then it's just water and earth. The body just falls to the floor, right? And a corpse can't climb a mountain. So you have to be breathing the air, you have to have the fire in you in order to lift yourself up and climb up things. But when you're just a corpse, you just fall down because it's just earth and water.
That's so interesting. From a dietary perspective, I interviewed Dr. Robert Morse, who is primarily a fruit eater. I don't know if he would consider himself a fruitarian. I don't remember exactly what he claims related to that, but he eats primarily fruits and some vegetables too. But he talked about how when he would exclusively eat raw fruit, he felt that his essence, his consciousness, floated off into other realms. So he had to at least eat some cooked vegetables from time to time to sort of ground himself. Now he's not a meat eater at all, but it was really interesting to me. And this seems to be a common thread. It's a very generalized statement, but a common thread in people who eat primarily fruits and vegetables tend to have a consciousness that is less grounded. And again, I'm not saying that you're not a grounded person if you're listening to this and that is you. I'm just saying that from the people I've discussed with, there are some people who, for example, were vegan for quite some time and actually thriving while being vegan, but said, I needed to eat some meat because I needed to feel more grounded in reality. I don't know if that relates at all to what you're saying, but there seems to be a common thread there. Have you thought about that from a dietary lens too?
Yeah, so in alchemy, fruits are associated with the air element. So fruits tend to be something high up in the air, high up in the tree. You have to reach up for them. And they hold volatile essences, which are the sweet flavors and so on. Those are considered volatile. So there's an airiness to fruit, whereas vegetables tend to grow on the ground or near the ground. And of course, meat is, from animals that are crawling on the ground. So they're associated with, they're heavier and more earthy, as it were. Whereas fruit and, petals and, flowery essences are considered to be more airy. So that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing with gravity that a lot of people who realize the problems with the idea that it's gravity causing things to fall to the ground will bring up is density and buoyancy. What are your thoughts on that as it relates to what you're saying with this flow of ether that is sort of pulling things towards the earth?
Well, it comes down to the elements because, when you talk about density and buoyancy, you're talking about water and air.
Yeah.
And, water and air clearly don't mix, right? The air sits on top of the water. And if you bring air down into the water, then, it forms bubbles and then rises back up and reunites with the air. And similarly, if you lift water up into the air, it will eventually come back down to the water again. So, density and buoyancy is, I guess, one way of looking at it, but I look at things in terms of the elements, and it just makes sense to me that, those elements, they keep to their own. I think it was Aristotle said that the elements always seek to return to themselves. So that's why, the bubbles rise back to the air, fire goes up, heat rises because, the light comes from the sky. So heat and light goes back up to the sky, and then earth and water, water will always trickle back to a larger body of water, and earth, of course, will fall back to the earth. So I think the elements have a place. They have a place that they sort of want to be at, And if you take them away from there, then they will move back to it, given the freedom to do so.
It's interesting too, because when I started going down, I won't call it a rabbit hole, but sort of playing with the idea, well, it's density and buoyancy that explains things. You still have to wrestle with that there's something causing the phenomenon of density and buoyancy to occur. There's still some pulling motion happening, or I guess you could say flow motion in the sense that ether is like this flow going downward that is causing density and buoyancy to occur. Because I know that there are a lot of heliocentrists, to say it correctly, not heliocentricists, as I said previously, who will say, well, okay, what's causing density and buoyancy? And they'll be like, it's still ultimately gravity at the end of the day that's causing density and buoyancy. I'm like, honestly, that's a fair rebuttal to that. Now, with this context, that it's like ether, this ether flow that is causing things to come towards the ground because the flow of ether is coming from the heavens towards the earth, that sort of makes sense of that now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there was a series of experiments done by a guy called Dayton Miller, and this was like in a similar vein to the Michelson-Morley experiment. So he essentially did the same experiment. I won't go into the full details of it, but he did hundreds of thousands of measurements at different altitudes, so high up and also under the ground. And what he found was they were measuring the ether wind. And again, at this time, the concept of ether wind was not a theoretical concept. It was like
fundamental,
mainstream established. They expected to find it, and they did. But what he found was that under the ground or close to the ground, the ether wind was very slow, but at higher altitudes, it was very fast. So it shows this differential in the way the ether moves with altitude. And I think the idea of the current, though, is just there because, things do fall. The elements do fall and the elements rise, fire and air. So there seems to be, there's two currents going on at all times. The heat rises up from the ground up to the sky and, objects fall to the ground. It's like, so there seems to be these two different types of currents that are happening simultaneously. And I think that's what kind of causes the elements to find their own particular place within creation.
Mm-hmm. So as it applies to the human body, would you say that our soul and what animates this physical vessel are the air and fire elements? You said that, right?
Well, that's what enables us to lift ourselves up.
Yeah.
And of course, the air is associated with the mind and thoughts and so on. You always have, like in the cartoons, that thoughts are always like little clouds.
Yeah.
Right? Because the thoughts kind of move through our mind like clouds. They change form and shape. They're sort of temporary, and they take all kinds of different shapes, just like clouds. And the mind is this kind of airy space where a thought is not a thing, right? So if a thought is not earth and it's not water, then it must be air and fire.
That's so interesting too, because it's like looking at it from the perspective of the elementals. If you look at thoughts as just passing things like clouds, like the air element, we then take them into our being, and all these things in this room originally started as a thought. So it's on us as human beings to take those things that are fundamentally the air element and then actualize them in reality through the earth and the water elements, essentially.
Yeah, that's called fixing the volatile. So there's, talk in alchemy of turning matter into spirit, but also turning spirit into matter. So taking what is volatile and making it concrete. And essentially we do that whenever we express thoughts into reality through our work. It's like we're taking something volatile, just this cloudy sort of thing in our mind, and then making it into something real. Uh-huh. So fixing the volatile.
From an alchemical perspective, what are your thoughts on egregores?
Egregores, I mean, it makes sense from the point of view of, human beings taking an idea, sharing that idea, and then that becoming like a sort of persistent thought form in the minds of many different people. And then, of course, that then affects how they act in the world and what they create with their hands. When they're fixing the volatile, it's like the volatile they're bringing in is this thought form that they're, it's like a persistent thought form.
Creates like a vortex within the ether, essentially.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the vortex thing in the ether is quite interesting. So there's a theory in fluid dynamics which says that the lifetime of a vortex is inversely proportional to the viscosity of a fluid. So what that means is...
Say that again.
The lifetime of a vortex is inversely proportional to the viscosity of the fluid.
Okay.
So if you have a very thick viscous fluid like treacle, let's say, and you try to get a vortex going, right, you're not going to have much luck. I mean, it's just going to stop really quickly. But then you have something like water, you get a vortex going, it will keep going for quite a while. But then if you then have a thinner fluid like air, you can get vortexes going for a long time, like hurricanes and things, they can...
Tornadoes.
Yeah, tornadoes, they can last for several hours. Now, if you then imagine a fluid which is even less viscous than air, which would be ether, and it's been described as a sort of fluid of infinitely low viscosity, then in theory, a vortex could be sustained indefinitely within the ether.
That is so interesting, man. So that is that kind of how you would look at thought forms then? That like where there's so much concentration of thought energy from a bunch of individuals focused on something that it creates this distortion, this vortex in the ether that is sustained almost permanently until those thought patterns dissolve amongst the masses that are overwhelmingly, unwittingly focused on it because we're taught these things from young ages. For example, like the idea of transmission of microbes, that's a thought form. You could say that that's almost an egregore where we actually create the appearance of that occurring in reality because so much attention has been given to it despite it not actually being a real concrete fundamental aspect of reality. Do you get what I'm saying there? Yeah.
I mean, that makes sense. I mean, it's like the world, right? The word world, which it sounds like whirled, and whirled is, what it's like you're creating a world when everybody has this persistent thought form and they're all acting on it. It's sort of the energy is whirling, right? Around from person to person, and that, that gives you your vortex and creates that kind of like an alternate reality field.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. I have a lot more thoughts on that. I'll have to wrestle with that and bring it up later, though. Most healthcare today operates on an outdated mechanistic model, treating the body like a battlefield rather than a self-healing system. You wait months for an appointment only to receive a rush diagnosis that labels you rather than truly understanding your unique health. Even in holistic health, many practitioners rely on endless lab tests and supplement protocols, addressing symptoms instead of the root cause. And the result? Another prescription or supplement regimen that merely suppresses or masks symptoms rather than facilitating true healing, whether the imbalance was physical, emotional, energetic, or a mix of all three. And that's why Dr. Tom Cowan co-founded the New Biology Clinic, to offer something radically different. As one of the most respected natural health doctors in the world, Dr. Cowan has spent decades challenging conventional medicine and advancing a deeper understanding of human biology, water, and natural health. His work isn't just about rejecting the mainstream, it's about offering a more truthful, biologically coherent approach for healing. The New Biology Clinic recognizes that health isn't about fighting disease, it's about restoring balance. You're not a diagnosis, you're an individual with a unique story, and healing should honor that. With virtual consultations available worldwide, the clinic offers a flat-rate monthly membership that gives you direct access to practitioners who take the time to actually listen. Members also get exclusive health live streams, a resource library, and live sessions covering everything from biofield tuning and breathwork to movement and meditation, all designed to support whole body healing. And if you're not ready for a membership, you can book a one-time appointment, sign up for an enrichment-only membership for the healing modalities alone, or schedule a free connection session with one of the care team members to see how the New Biology Clinic can help in your specific situation. This isn't about keeping you dependent on doctors. It's about making you sovereign over your health. Head to newbiologyclinic.com and use code THEWAYFORWARD, and that's spelled The Way, F-O-R-W-A-R-D, for $50 off account activation, or just head to the show notes for more info. If you're a member of The Way Forward, email hello@thewayforward.com for $150 off. Your body already knows how to heal, and New Biology Clinic helps you remember. One thing that I wanted to talk about too, related to ether itself, we were talking off camera a little bit about how I basically asked you, was ether sort of cast aside because of its implications on cosmology? Obviously, we have Michelson-Morley and what it clearly demonstrated. Also, we have Aries failure and what it clearly demonstrated. This one that you just brought up with this other guy, which also, I'd imagine, demonstrated the exact same thing that these other two experiments demonstrated, which because of their preconceived ideas with respect to at least Michelson-Morley, they looked at the results and said, well, there must be movement of the Earth because we have this preconceived idea that there is. So even though these results are showing us that there is a tiny bit of measurable ether drift or ether wind, and there is no movement of the Earth, because we know the Earth is moving, it must mean that light bends and time dilates and all this nonsense that they came up with, again, because of the preconceived ideas. And if that is not making sense to you, if you're listening and watching this, I'll link my episode with Dr. Robert Bennett in the show notes. It's a fascinating episode where he goes into Aries failure and also Michelson-Morley pretty in depth. All that to say, do you think it was because of the implications on cosmology that they cast aside ether, or was it because ether itself is sort of the alchemical bridge between spirit and spirituality and science that sort of blended the two and made them really one fundamental science, which you've called alchemy? Or was it both?
Well, I mean, you're talking about the motivations for the deception, which is hard to
speculation, of course,
speculate on. But we definitely seem to be living in an age of deception. I know it's maybe something we're going to talk about in a bit, but so much happened around that same time, like the beginning of the last century, right? You've got the new physics that came on board. Einstein, which means first stone. The name Einstein.
Does it really?
One stone or first stone. And I had hypothesized that this is the foundation stone. So this is like a Masonic idea that when you're constructing something new, you have to start with the first stone, the foundation stone.
Was that his birth name?
The cornerstone. Well, I don't know. Maybe he had a different name, but I ended up discovering that all the quantum physicists have like these really unusual names that relate to quantum physics in some way, shape, or form.
Weird.
And so I sort of see it now as the whole thing is a construct. And exactly why it's being constructed, I mean, we could say, okay, they wanted to hide the ether, or maybe they wanted to disempower people. It's also around about that time was the Flexner report, which completely changed the face of medicine and healing. Now, because alchemists were healers as well. They weren't just chemists or physicists. They were the first medicine makers. And so right around that time, it's like, physics, chemistry, biology, medicine, all of it got completely changed and entered into a new paradigm. And it just seems to me that that whole paradigm was a construct. It wasn't just, we discovered this, so now we have to adjust our views. It was like, it was constructed for a purpose, and that purpose seems to be deception.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me. And I know we'll get into later our thoughts on what might be one of the primary causes and reasons for the deception. Well, we'll talk about that later. One of the pieces of the deception, though, is nuclear weapons. And you hear a lot of people in the truth space say that there's no evidence of nukes, or nukes aren't real, they're a total hoax. But I've not seen many people break down why that is. People just kind of say that, and I'm sure they're leaning on or standing on the shoulders of giants who've actually done the work to show how nuclear weapons, there's no actual evidence for them. But being someone who was formally trained in nuclear physics, I would love to hear your thoughts on the problems with nuclear weapons, because right now there is a lot of fear surrounding nuclear weapons, even in the truther space, for the people who have not become hip to the understanding that there's no such thing as nuclear weapons. There's tons of fear floating around regarding what China might do, what Iran might do, what the U.S. could do, what Israel could do, because Israel has a supposed arsenal of nuclear weapons. But I'd just love to hear your thoughts on the idea of nuclear weapons.
Yeah, well, I was thinking if nukes were real, someone would have used them by now, Of course, you say, well, what about Hiroshima and Nagasaki as the kind of classic case? Now, it's interesting. My book, actually, just a few days ago, got published in Japan.
Really?
And so it's now available in bookstores in Japan.
And they're still dealing with the radiation fallout to this day, right?
Yeah, well, no. So Hiroshima and Nagasaki are thriving modern cities, that built right back after the bombings. So the first major problem is that, according to nuclear physics, they should be, desolate wastelands full of like mutants and, all this kind of thing. Nothing can grow there. And, we're told that over and over again, that this nuclear radiation creates this lasting effect for thousands of years. Now, that clearly hasn't happened. But what I thought was funny, the reason I mentioned my book in Japan is because lots of people said to me when I came out against nuclear weapons, they said, think of the Japanese, right? You'll be offending like a whole nation of people. But actually, it was the Japanese were the first to reach out and translate my book.
Wow.
And the publisher absolutely loved it.
That's amazing.
I spent a lot of time talking with the translator and, so she was aware of all this. And, so, I mean, it doesn't take...
What was her perspective on it, though? Like coming from Japan?
Well, I mean, she loved the book, and she didn't buy into the nuclear thing already, you know, so it wasn't new to her. But I mean, it's just it doesn't take much brain power to work out that the supposed effects of nuclear radiation are not there in Japan for us to witness. And then, but the guy that really pulled all this apart was a guy called Michael Palmer with the book Hiroshima Revisited, and he goes into like all the details of it, and there's a huge amount to consider. But he came to the conclusion that the bombs used napalm and mustard gas, which, napalm is sort of this sticky, like gel-like thing. They can release it over the city and set fire to it. So it rains down fire in this sort of sticky gel-like stuff. And they had done the same thing in Tokyo as well, I believe. And mustard gas creates this kind of poisoning effect, which was attributed to nuclear radiation.
It could probably cause deformities in babies that are born around then with mustard gas being throughout the environment.
Yeah, I mean, it's like poisoning. Yeah. So there's that. And, he talks about a lot of interesting things, but one of the things is that he said that they had to come up with this nuclear idea because napalm is a chemical weapon. And the Geneva Convention in 1925 forbid the use of chemical weapons in war, which again is something. I mean, you're allowed to blow people up with combustible fuels, but you're not allowed to burn them with chemical fuels. Right?
It's wild that that's even a thing. I think about that all the time. I even thought about that when I was in the Army, like how we have standards for what's acceptable to blow people up or not. Like that is insane to me. That's insane. Yeah.
So because they used chemical weapons in violation of the Geneva Convention, they reframed it as a new type of combustible fuel because combustion fuels were allowed, but chemical ones were not. So, there's a lot of, shenanigans going on there. And then there's, the stories about none of the Western journalists actually got into Japan for like 4 weeks, like 4 weeks after it had happened and stuff. So there's no real Western witnesses of what actually occurred. So there's a lot of, trust me, bro, from the military on that part. But and in the years since, I mean, there's all these like tests, where you've seen like nukes being set off in the desert or whatever. They were using TNT. It's again, no nuclear fallout. You can create a large explosion. You could make an explosion as big as you want. It's just get the fuel together, ignite it. So obviously there are big bombs, and I'm not saying they don't have devastating weapons, but it's just not nuclear. They're not splitting the atom, which is the central claim behind it all. And there's just no evidence that they split any atoms ever. So I just don't buy it. But then the next question that comes up after that is, well, what about nuclear power stations? And, I was aware, having had a PhD in nuclear physics coming out, I was aware that I had absolutely no idea how to build a nuclear power station. I mean, I knew the theory that, there's these uranium atoms, and if you fire neutrons at them, they will split and give off more neutrons, which will split more atoms, and they'll get this chain reaction that'll, cause it all to explode. But, how do you fire neutrons at a uranium atom, right? I didn't actually know practically how you could accomplish such a thing. So I started looking into it, and the first thing that surprised me was I had thought all this time that they were using uranium as the fuel in the nuclear reactors. That's what we're told. They use uranium. But uranium's a metal, right? And metals have particular properties, right? They're, shiny and lustrous and conductive and this kind of thing. But when you actually look at it, they don't use uranium. They use something called yellowcake, which is a non-metallic, bright yellow powder. And they pack it into these little pellets made from zirconium, and then they stock up the fuel assembly with these pellets of yellowcake. Now, they call yellowcake uranium oxide, all right? So, they've fit uranium into it somehow, but it's false to say that they're using uranium as the fuel when uranium is a metal and they're using a non-metallic substance as the fuel. And I was starting looking into what yellowcake is, and actually someone, when I was at Elementals gathering, someone had some that they'd mined locally.
Dude, you 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if someone brought that up to you, you'd be like, oh, fuck, get that shit away from me.
Yeah, they had this rock. I'll send you the picture of it. And it was like a black rock, very heavy for its size. And it's got all this like bright yellow stuff like laced throughout it. So, they separate the yellow from the black in the rock in the sort of refinement process. And then they potentize it through, various other processes. But so then the question is, well, how does the yellowcake then, create the energy? And I think this happens through something called, pyrolysis, which is the heating of a substance in the absence of oxygen. So because the fuel is contained to the pellets, there's no oxygen in the pellets. So they can start the fuel burning or releasing energy without oxygen causing it to explode, essentially. So as the fuel inside the pellet releases energy, that energy comes out in the form of heat through the walls of the pellet.
Got it.
And it's submerged in water, so that then creates the steam, which drives the turbines. And I was trying to get to the bottom of what yellowcake was, and it occurred to me it looks exactly like sulfur. Like exactly like sulfur.
Interesting.
It's indistinguishable. It's the exact same color, very distinctive, bright yellow. And this is interesting because in alchemy, sulfur is a fundamental principle, not just a chemical on the periodic table, but it's the actual principle of fire in matter. So fire being the energy of the sun, trapped in matter in some way. And so if you want to harness that, you have to release the matter. And then it just started, from there, then things just started lighting up because basically anything that is combustible or corrosive or anything like that contains sulfur. TNT contains sulfur, napalm contains sulfur, mustard gas contains sulfur. It's, sulfuric acid, anything where there's like this fieriness trapped within matter that's being released. That is the principle of sulfur in alchemy. So it's my view that these power stations are actually just using sulfur to generate the power, and that uranium is actually a red herring.
Oh, wow.
And all the nuclear physics is just like a smokescreen to, hide the simplicity of the technology.
Wow, that's crazy, man. So it actually might be a good fuel source then.
What? Nuclear.
Yeah, quote unquote nuclear.
Nuclear, yeah. So it makes more sense to call it nuclear because it's a new type of power generation that's clear because it doesn't produce any smoke.
Yeah.
And, I think it is good. I mean, I think they work really well and they don't produce any smoke. And,
So you're a proponent of it. You're like, green energy, woo.
Well, yeah, I mean.
Because you know how there are so many people who are like, why are we using all of this like oil-based stuff when we could be using nuclear energy? And then there's the fear of like the reactors breaking and an event happening like what happened in Chernobyl. Mm-hmm. But it's like, no, that's not actually a concern really.
Well, I mean, a meltdown could occur if, for example, something happened with the water where, the reaction had begun, but the water isn't present to cool it down. And then the whole fuel assembly could start to melt due to the heat, So, it's possible things could go wrong and you could have accidents. And, when you're dealing with energy, there's always going to be that possibility.
Right. But in terms of like the radioactive fallout from a situation like that is causing issues 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the line, that's probably not a concern.
Well, so with the radioactivity, this piece of uranium yellowcake that I saw, the guy, he didn't have a Geiger counter with him, but he said, it is, when you put the Geiger counter up, it's like, but he carries it around with him everywhere. And,
Was he okay?
Yeah, he was fine. Yeah, he wasn't a mutant. He didn't have 6 fingers or anything like that. Yeah, and of course, there's guys like, is it Matt from Cultivate Elevate?
Yeah.
So he's got all these old world like radium products and stuff. He's got this radium water vessel, and he puts the Geiger counter in, and it's just like, and then he's just like drinking the water straight out of it, drinks it all the time.
That's a pretty healthy guy too, man. Like he really is.
He knows what he's talking about. Yeah. So I think radioactivity is kind of used. It's like a story to keep people away from powerful things, or perhaps from places where they don't want anybody to go. They declare it to be radioactive, and then most people are just going to be like, well, I ain't going anywhere near that.
Totally.
Or, I'm not going to touch that stuff. I'm not going to go near there. So it's a way of like keeping people away from things. But
you think it applies to mercury as well?
Yeah, well, mercury is interesting. I mean, I spent a bit of time last year looking into how metals are made. And so I started, with copper and gold and silver, and I'm just looking on YouTube and seeing, what the process is, how they make it. And then so I'm like, how mercury's made. And then every video is just like scare stuff. It's like cinnabar, the most dangerous mineral in all of planet Earth. And this kind of thing. It's like, I've got a piece of cinnabar in the house. It's never done me any harm. It's just like this bright red substance. So yeah, it's like, Geiger counters do pick up radiation from certain objects. Certain objects do emit light, like invisible light, but I've never seen any evidence that it causes mutations or cancer or anything of that nature. Yeah.
What about the claims that people that were near Chernobyl had a lot of health issues just after the fact? Could that have been a function partially? This is sort of a rhetorical question because I'd imagine you'd say yes to this, but of just the mass, I guess you could say mass psychogenic illness that is created from the trauma of like, oh, everyone needs to be afraid because this fallout happened and now it's going to be in the air. It's going to be blowing this way because of the wind. I always go back to Daniel Reutis's book where he covers the countless examples of suggestion in mass by the media, by the government, actually causing physical symptoms related to that idea in mass amounts of people. Like real physical symptoms. I mean, this is well documented.
Yeah, for sure. There could be a psychogenic component to it with all the scaremongering that was going on around there. If I remember rightly, they did end up attributing a lot of the illness to iodine, which polluted the water after the accident or something like this. So, so there even are, non-radioactive sort of explanations for it as well. But yeah, I mean, it could be psychogenic, a lot of it.
Or a combination of both.
Yeah. It's like people expecting to get sick because they're in the presence of this, dangerous radiation, let's say. But there's a good documentary on YouTube about a guy who lives in the Chernobyl zone. I don't know if you've seen that. He's like this old guy who just, didn't want to leave his place, and he has kind of the whole place to himself because no one else will kind of go there. And he has. So
he's living like I Am Legend shit, and he does like just for the sake of it.
And they come around. The government comes around every so often, and he has to get like tested, to make sure he's all right and everything. But I mean, he's thriving. There's loads of plant life and all this kind of stuff.
Just chugging vodka.
Yeah,
totally fine.
Yeah,
probably has a dog and like has multiple generations of pets around him, and he's totally fine.
Yeah, that's it. So, accidents do happen when you're working with, energy and technology, and, there are big bombs and, all that kind of stuff, but it's really just the narrative around radioactivity and the splitting of the atom that is really the questionable part of that. So just trying to get to the root of that and, again, show that it's not what it seems.
Yeah. A question that I have related to like a Geiger counter, for example, and it going off when this guy has this yellowcake near him. What is that actually demonstrating though? What is that actually measuring?
Well, it's a frequency. So once the energy coming off this thing.
Yeah.
And it's not visible light, right? Because it's not glowing. But there is energy coming off it in the invisible spectrum. So like ultraviolet or beyond, let's say. And so the Geiger counter will click when it receives energy above a certain frequency threshold.
Okay, so it's not attributing like this is harmful or not harmful. It's just energy above a certain threshold.
Energy above a certain threshold. But again, because it's interpreted in the materialist physics way, they describe it as a particle. So the Geiger counter clicks, people sort of think they're catching particles.
Yeah.
But actually they're just subjecting it to a pulse of energy above a certain frequency.
That's so interesting. I wish I paid attention more in electrical engineering. I took this class called EE 301, and that was like the one class, because I majored in systems engineering in college, and I had to take the foundations for all other facets of engineering. EE 301 was the one that I could not wrap my mind around no matter how much I tried, so forgive me for my ignorance on electrical terminology. But going back to my question regarding like a Geiger counter, right, and what it's measuring, it's just measuring energy above a certain frequency band, right, that is not visible.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even measuring the energy. It's just notifying you that it has received some energy above that frequency.
Okay.
Yeah.
And again, not assigning harm or no harm to that whatsoever.
No, I mean, I haven't seen any evidence of the harm caused by it. And as I say, people are, showing that they have radioactive stuff, and it's, not
So
hurting them.
the question then becomes, like, what makes something above a certain frequency harmful or not harmful to us biologically?
It's probably more about the amplitude than the frequency.
Yeah, okay.
I think, people focus a lot on frequency, but it's like if it's a very small amplitude, it's like not going to harm you versus a very loud, strong signal. And
Especially if it's like pulsed.
Yeah. And you can think of it with sound.
Yep.
It's like the sound can be, really beautiful at one volume, but at a higher volume, it can be destructive. It can damage your ears and shake your organs and this kind of thing. And so it'd be the same with radiation. It's not just the frequency, it's the amplitude, but also the wave shape. So, not all waves are sine waves, right?
Yep.
You can add sine waves together to create any other shape of wave, and that's called the harmonics. So if you have a wave coming out that has all these, harmonics or overtones in them that creates this kind of jagged waveform, something that's more jagged could be more destructive than something which is a smooth waveform.
Yeah.
So there's various different factors that might cause radiation to be dangerous. It's not just the frequency.
It's so interesting related to that in a seemingly unrelated way. I'm going to transition topics here. I just saw yesterday this one account that I follow that like covers different music festivals across the world is talking about how a lot of big multi-genre festivals are no longer willing to book some of the largest hip hop artists for basically for insurance purposes, because they find that a lot of the hip hop artists that come, the crowd becomes so chaotic and so disruptive and destructive that too many people are getting hurt. So they just don't want to book these artists anymore. And my mind immediately went to the sound that is being put out from these songs. Obviously the lyrics and the debauchery of most of hip hop culture as well, but it's also like the sound. Like I listened to some of the songs that I used to listen to when I really, really loved hip hop, and I still do. I still listen to some for sure. But aside from the debauchery, like the feeling you get inside your body is one of like rage and anger,
Yeah, I mean, it's gangster.
Yeah, literally, like in its sound, without even any of the lyrics, though, too.
Yeah. I mean, I come from a music scene where it's just all about the dance and the ecstatic bliss of dancing to the music, whereas hip hop's a different intention completely. And I mean, I'm just generalizing there, but the gangster hip hop, and it was never my scene, but yeah, it's definitely a whole different experience to dance music. Yeah.
We talked a little bit about, and you talk about this in your book brilliantly, by the way, like the alchemy of music creation. Can we talk about that a little bit as well?
Sure. Yeah. Well, when I first started getting into alchemy, I was, in the throes of my music career, and it seemed to me there was this connection with music, even though, the alchemists weren't specifically talking about music in these books I was reading. They're talking more in like chemistry terms. But there's this link between chemistry and psychology. Like the 7 steps of alchemy are like 7 sort of chemical processes, calcination, dissolution, separation, conjunction, fermentation, distillation, and coagulation, right? And we understand those in chemical terms. But what I learned from alchemy is that these are also psychological processes. They're processes that we go through in our life, in our body, in our spiritual development. And it was that sort of link between the chemistry and the psychology that made me understand it from a musical perspective, because music is music is about chemistry and psychology as well. In fact, people take chemicals often to go and experience music, and it enhances it greatly.
Totally.
In fact, there's a kind of magic that happens, and this happens in shamanism as well, where you take your medicine, which is your chemical, and then music is played to you whilst that chemical is working its way through your system. And, magical things happen, miraculous healings happen, visions, all kinds of stuff that you just can't explain comes about from that interaction between music and chemistry. So I kind of ran with that, and I made the correspondence between those 7 processes and 7 processes in the music making act. Because music making now, well, I mean music production specifically, because playing music is not the 7 steps of alchemy, right? Playing music is like a language. You're just expressing yourself in real time. But when you produce music, you're essentially starting from nothing or just from some samples or some waveforms. And then you're then going through a series of processes to, combine those and structure them and refine them, ferment them, distill them, purify it until you bring it up to a finished piece of music, which is, like gold in a lot of ways. And I've said this before many times, but I think music, when it's done right, is actually more valuable than gold because, if you think of gold as just money, right? It's like once you spend it, it's gone.
Yep.
But once
or
you have
a physical thing that only one person can hold.
Yeah, exactly. But once you have a piece of music and it's distributed, it's like out there, it's like getting played constantly. It brings money every year. As long as people keep listening to it, it keeps giving you wealth, and it's always working. It's like your own radiation that's like, coming off of you. So, I mean, my music career is kind of behind me now, but people
you're not producing anymore?
Not so much. No.
Okay. Just not inspired to?
I think just the signs after COVID, like all the signs were that I needed to, start talking about
You're so
science.
Brilliant though, dude. I actually have a question related to inspiration too, though, that was just lingering in my mind. When you reflect on some of your best tracks that you've made, do you feel that it was you creating it, or was it something flowing through, even in terms of like the chords that were used? Was that just like inspiration that came to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to place it. I mean, but in the creative act, like let's say, right, you start by, just making a drum sound or, making playing on the piano or something. Like when you create something, there's this feedback that you're now listening to the thing you've just created or observing what you've just created. And then it goes through your sort of goes through your brain and you sort of analyze it. And is it any good? How did it make me feel? What does it need? Does it need this or that? And then you then do the next step and then you observe that. And then it comes round and round. There's this just cycle, and it can go on for weeks or months, on a single tune. Sometimes you can get stuck and you think, oh, you're just going to abandon it. And then you come back a year later and you listen to it and it sounds brand new. And you're like, holy God, that's amazing. And then you're able to finish it off. So yeah, it's something that it feels like it can't be forced. There is some kind of hard to explain element just from putting yourself through that process. Just create something and then look at it and then make it better.
Like you're co-creating with something else is what I'm getting at.
Yeah. I mean, where it comes from, it's hard.
That's what I'm getting at. Yeah. So I don't know if this story is true, but I came across this about a week ago that someone who claims to have been close to Michael Jackson claims that and he was like always in the studio with Michael Jackson, that one day at like 3 a.m. Michael Jackson woke up from a dream and was like, we need to go to the studio right now because I need to get this melody that I have out right now. And I supposedly, he said in the studio, if we didn't do this right now at 3 a.m., Prince was going to get it. Basically that like what they're saying he was indicating was that there's this like field that the best artists could tap into. You can look at that from a nefarious lens too, but let's assume like benevolence here, that he just had this inspiration that came to him in a dream, and it's like this field that he was tapping into. He was like, if I don't go create this right now, Prince is going to create this exact same song tomorrow. So I need to do it right now and get it done.
That's interesting. Yeah, I heard that before. I mean, that's plausible. I mean, it's like where do these thoughts come from and these ideas? Maybe they are like clouds in the ether, and it's like you're seeing like a certain cloud of a certain shape passing. It's like everyone else can see it around you as well.
Or anyone who's like along the same thread, right? Like pulling on the same general type of thread or same frequency.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's so interesting to think about it like that.
And then it's, again, you're taking the volatile and then fixing it into matter so that it can endure. As a real thing.
Most of our modern lives are spent completely disconnected from the natural world. Artificial light environments, concrete, rubber soles on our feet, non-native EMFs everywhere. We have totally immersed ourselves in a completely unnatural world. Getting outside and putting your feet on the earth is actually vitally important for our health. And that's why I've worn Earth Runners for years, especially when I'm out in nature, whether I'm on a trail, hiking, fly fishing, camping, or just spending time outside at an event like Confluence with the earth beneath my feet. Earth Runners are minimalist sandals that are especially great when you're out in a natural environment. They have a wide toe box and a flexible sole that lets your feet spread, grip, and move naturally on uneven terrain, whether it's trails, grass, sand, or dirt. Instead of restricting your feet the way most modern footwear does, they allow your feet to engage naturally with the ground and move the way they were designed to do in a natural setting. What also makes Earth Runners unique is their conductive grounding design, which allows your body to reconnect with the Earth's natural negative charge while you walk. And as I've discussed on a variety of podcast episodes, negative charge is essential for your body's energy production. If you value getting outside, reconnecting with nature, and moving in a way that your body was designed to move while on natural surfaces, check them out. Head to earthrunners.com or just head to the show notes and use code FORWARD10 at checkout for 10% off. Again, that's FWRD10 for 10% off your order. If you're ready to rewild your health and walk in deeper alignment with nature, then check out Earth Runners and feel the difference from the ground up. You know, it's interesting too, because it relates to something like this. For example, last year at Confluence, the one that you came to, I had been thinking about this theme that I didn't express outwardly regarding Confluence, but like the theme for me coming into Confluence was about remembering who we are. Like that was the theme. And it was so interesting. In at least 8 of the talks that I saw, the presenter said something along those exact same lines. I'm like, what is that? Like all of us were pulling along the same thread, or a lot of us were, without even sharing that with each other. You know what I mean? It's so interesting, man.
Yeah, that's kind of like the 100th monkey thing. Yeah, or that scientific discoveries happen independently around about the same time. You know, again, that points to this thing that there's like something in the ether at a particular time and place, and, you know, different people can like tap into it and bring it into physical. Yeah.
So cool. So cool.
So you were talking about us remembering who we are. And one of the things about ether that I came to recently is this idea that the ether is actually our home, right? It's, you know, where we are, it's what we're made from, where we came from. And it's interesting because, you know, the word ether is an anagram of earth and heart. Okay, now the earth is our home, and heart, home is where the heart is as well. And a lady wrote to me recently and told me that there's this word in Welsh, which is hireth. So it's H-I-R-A-E-T-H, which if you drop the second H and you just switch it around is ether. And it's a Welsh word meaning a sense of belonging. And so that's like three different things pointing to this idea that the ether is actually our home. It's where we belong. It's where we come from. And so by taking the ether out of science, they're disconnecting us from our source and our home. And so we're all like wandering lost. We're like, where are we? You know, what are we? Who are we? The ether really helps to answer that.
I said that when we were sitting on the patio, when we were taking a break. It's like, for me, when I brought ether into the context of how reality works, it made this life purely a spiritual experience. Like all of life, every aspect of it, every moment of it is fundamentally a spiritual experience, because God is within the ether. God is the mover of the ether, and ether is, all things are comprised of ether. And you could even say like the akasha is in the ether. Obviously, the field of consciousness is like synonymous with the ether. And that feels like home. It feels like home when we get back to that understanding. Like I said, it like takes the heaviness off of all of the muck of modern science and modern spirituality, the disconnection between the two. It bridges the gap between them and just makes sense of all of it from a very naturalist perspective. I asked you that when we were out there. It's like, do you consider yourself a naturalist? And you're like, yeah, I'm a natural philosopher. And I think Eileen says the same thing, that she's a naturalist or a natural philosopher. It's because you're looking at life as fundamentally all things are spiritual naturally. Like it is an inherent part to this natural world. It's not some act that you go do to be spiritual.
Yeah, that's it. The ether is a spiritual substance because unlike the other substances like the 4 elements, which, you know, we can, you know, hold in our hands or contain in some way, the ether can't be contained, right? It's like it flows through things. You know, the air flows around us, but the ether flows through us. So it has that spiritual property, but it's still real, but it's not as tangible as the other elements.
What is, in your mind, the relationship between God and ether?
Well, the ether is how God acts in the world. I mean, obviously God is a great mystery, but, you know, that seems to be the way in which God creates, is through manipulation of the ether.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. Yeah. This is a good segue into what I wanted to get into next. You had mentioned before we clicked record when we were, I think, messaging back and forth on what we wanted to discuss today, how a lot of modern Christians and just people who follow Christ to some degree look at alchemy as fundamentally evil because there's the occult term that is just thrown onto it, and there's a negative connotation with the term occult, and anything that is of that ilk is automatically satanic or Luciferian or something like this. But you had mentioned that there's actually a link between the devotion of Christianity, like the devotion to Christ, to God, and then the actual, I don't remember what word you said, but like the actions, your actions related to following Christ or following God or living a godly life, and that is alchemy. So I'd love for you to share it from that perspective.
Sure, yeah. So, yeah, alchemists get branded as, charlatans and puffers and, witchcraft and sorcerers and all these kind of things. And that comes from the church, from the Catholic Church mainly. So, but when you start looking into it and you read the alchemists, it's like they were pious. They believed in Christ. They called Jesus the master, actually. So the master alchemist. And it's been said that alchemy is the operative wing of Christianity, so as opposed to the devotional wing. So you can devote yourself to Christ in various different ways, right? You can go to church, or whatever it is. Go to church and do what the church tells you to do. Have Christ in your heart, all that kind of thing. But the operative wing of Christianity is to actually act in the world in a Christ-like way. And this corresponds with alchemy. That's why they call Jesus Christ the master, because he was a master teacher. He taught profound truths using parables, and that's parables are occultism, right? Because it's like you're teaching a story in such a way that it can be an interesting story to those who are like uninitiated, but to those who with eyes to see, they'll see the deeper meaning.
And doesn't occult just mean hidden or veiled anyway?
Yeah. But it's hidden not to. Not to keep it away.
Right.
The idea is that the seeker should be able to find it.
Yep.
But if you're not seeking, you won't find it.
Right.
So
if you're not attuned to it, it's going to go right over your head.
That's it. So all the alchemical art and a lot of the alchemical symbolism and everything it's like parables. So they call Jesus the master because he was the master of this way of teaching. He was also the master builder. He was a carpenter. But the actual root word that was translated to carpenter in the Greek is tekton, which is like a kind of master craftsman, right? So, Jesus was a master craftsman, master teacher, and he was a healer. So there's this idea that Jesus was the one to turn like fallen nature into glorified nature, right? So it's like transmutation. Healing is transmutation. And basically all the miracles that Jesus performed were all alchemical operations. So actually doing alchemy, when you're teaching people, you're doing healing, when you're making things better, you're acting in the world in a Christ-like way.
Yeah.
And, all these alchemists, certainly the ones that I read, they were all lovers of Jesus Christ. They were not, Satanists or whatever.
Of course not, right. And of course there's you could say a dark arts side, a misuse of alchemy. And I think there's so much focus on that side of things that people tend to miss this side of things. With that said, I'd love your thoughts on, first, have you read The Red Lion, The Elixir of Eternal Life?
I've listened to the audiobook, but I've not read the... Yeah.
One of my favorite books of all time.
Yeah.
One of my favorite books of all time. It is so good. What is your opinion of Rosicrucianism? Not in its modern iteration, because I don't know that that's accurate Rosicrucianism, but in its original intent.
Well, I don't know a great deal about it, but the alchemist Robert Flood, who I talked about in my book, so he was considered the most eloquent, the most eloquent fan of the Rosicrucians. So he wrote in a number of letters to King James, which are all, published, where he was basically saying that the Rosicrucians are, good men doing good work and doing good alchemy, even though they were being cast out as these charlatans and all this kind of stuff at the time. He was a defender, apologist. That was the word I was looking for. Yeah, he was considered the most eloquent apologist of the Rosicrucians, and he believed they had a special mission and a special purpose that was all good. Now, I can't speak to what they do now or anything like that, but I did find it. So I've got these weird connections with Robert Flood, which I talked about in the book. These kind of spooky connections, and this was a guy like 400 years ago. And he was, educated in the UK. He went to university and he studied astrology and music. Right now, I went to university, studied astrophysics, and I did music in my spare time. Right, and after he left university, he went on tour around Europe, and he was like playing music and learning alchemy and stuff. And again, after I left university, I became, a musician, and I was touring the world, and that's when I learned about alchemy and stuff like that.
And this is before you even knew who he was either.
Yeah, so
that's wild. That is so wild, dude.
And then it turns out he had a nickname, and his nickname was De Fluctibus, which means of the flux. And my nickname was Head Flux. And people actually would call me The Flux when I would go to
wild,
gigs.
Man.
And then I realized this when I wrote the book, but then after I wrote the book, I realized that what I was doing by basically dismissing materialist science and, showing how alchemy is a superior science, that was actually what the Rosicrucians were all about. And so I myself have become a Rosicrucian apologist, effectively without even knowing it, because I didn't even talk about the Rosicrucians in my book. By basically defending alchemy and going after materialist science, I was doing what the Rosicrucians were about. So yeah, I'm also a Rosicrucian apologist, I guess, as well. But again, I have no idea what the Rosicrucians actually do now, but I think that was the original intention. They were supposed to be the keepers of this spiritual science, the Hermetic knowledge.
Yeah.
But I had all these weird connections with Robert Flood, but
that's
probably
so
need to look
wild,
into
that's
the Rosicrucians
uncanny.
a bit more.
That's pretty wild. That's really wild. It's interesting too, in the Red Line, if I remember correctly, I haven't read it in the last time I read it was late 2023, early 2024. But if I remember correctly, it talks about towards the end of the book how the Masons were actually originally benevolent in their intentions, but then got too involved with worldly affairs. And I'm like, I could see that as being plausible.
Yeah.
Possibly. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't know what Masons do anymore. I don't see... other than all these deceptions like NASA and stuff like that, which seems to be run by Masons. But look at the old buildings, and from the Masonic literature I've read, as well as things like Marty Leeds, the Gnostic Academy, he does a great job of showing that Masonry as an art form, as a science, is a beautiful thing. But we can't speak to what men who call themselves Masons are actually doing with that knowledge.
Right.
We can't say it's either good or bad. You just don't know. It's a secret.
It's very occulted. Very occulted. Yeah.
But Masonry is a beautiful thing, and I've had some Masons reach out to me since I published my book. One guy,
what degree though?
32nd.
Okay, that's what I'm wondering. I'm like, because from what I see, it's funny. My brother-in-law, when I first started sending him stuff on the problems with Freemasons running the world from a malevolent perspective, right? He was like, dude, I almost joined my local Masonic lodge and they just do community service. What's the big deal? I'm like, I think it's a little bit different when you get above the 32nd degree.
Yeah, I think from what he told me, a lot of people can get up to 32nd quite easily. Yeah. But then they don't go beyond, whatever into the 33rd. But no, I think they probably have done lots of good work, probably all this old world buildings and everything. I mean, those were very skilled Masons, but they're not just, brick workers. They were artists, they were building in devotion to God. I'm not ready to just dismiss Masonry as this evil occult thing, but they may be engaged in deception, right? And there may be a reason why everything is deceptive now. That this may tie into the millennial reign stuff.
That's why I was going in my mind too, because there's also the idea that many of these buildings were not actually built by Freemasons, speaking specific, obviously people who worked with masonry and were experts in masonry, someone built that. I'm talking about Freemasons as the occult group, the occult order. The idea that these buildings were not founded, not created by Freemasons. They came in and claimed that they were the ones that built all of them. There's another perspective that says that. And yeah, I had a whole episode with Paul Stobbs talking about this, so obviously we don't want to make this the entirety of the episode. But knowing what you know about alchemy, knowing what you know about the inversion of so many different aspects of what most people accept as true, which is fundamentally an inversion of what is true. What are your opinions on the whole Christ's millennial reign idea and that we're in the midst of Satan's little season?
Yeah, I think it's really compelling, honestly, because the old world looks like it was made at a time when people were united in their spiritual devotion. And all these old world buildings, I mean, they have Christ all over them. You know what I mean? He's
100%.
everywhere. Like, it's not just the churches, it's, everywhere, all over the realm. And so...
You know what I want to do after this episode? I want to drive you by the Texas State Capitol.
Oh, right, yeah.
Before we go to dinner. I want to show you that, dude, because like that is one of the most glaring examples. It's actually bigger than the nation's capital. Wow. Like it is bigger than the White House.
Yeah, I didn't start reading the Bible till I was about 38, 40 years old, started looking at it. And of course, one of the first things you realize is that the church are not proclaiming the truth of what's in the Bible. And that might be something as simple as heliocentrism, which they are endorsing, but you read the Bible and you're like, nowhere does it say that there's a planet Earth spinning around the sun, right? It's like fixed, stationary, immovable, with a firmament over the top, all this kind of thing. It's like, why aren't the church teaching that to people? Why are the church allowing people to believe in heliocentrism, which, was 1822, the church said that heliocentrism can be taught as a legitimate doctrine. And then, but there's all kinds of other things like gay marriage and that kind of stuff, the church is fine with now. And it's like, you look at the scripture, you're like, hang on. So it seems like the church are no longer proclaiming the truth of God, but instead proclaiming an inverted version of it.
Totally.
And now, why would that be? Well, you're talking about the millennial reign theory. So, right, it's in the book of Revelation. The church must know about that. It's literally their job to know. It's in the book. And so if it's in the book, it's divinely ordained, right? It says God will, Christ will go after his 1,000-year reign, and then there will be a season of deception where Satan is let loose, right? So who let Satan loose? God, right? It's like, it's not, the church that let Satan loose, right? So because then it's a divinely ordained season of deception, the church and the Masons and everything probably had to get on board with it. And, so I kind of feel like a lot of these Masonic deceptions, it's like, they're doing it because that's what they have to do in this season of deception, but it's done in such a way that you can figure out the truth if you understand.
Yeah, it goes back to like if you have eyes to see and ears to hear.
Yeah. So it's kind of an occultism.
I mean, look at COVID, for example, right? Like, obviously, you could look at that and say that was a very chaotic, very tumultuous time. It was a wicked thing that was employed upon the masses. And at the same time, for those who have eyes to see and ears to hear, my life has gotten so much better through the midst of that. I'm more on path with my purpose in this life. My relationships are more rich. My understanding of myself and my relationship to my creator and to reality is more rich because of COVID. And the list goes on. That's a perfect example right there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Same with me. I was forced to correct myself in like so many ways during that period. But yeah, so because if you go back, say, before the inversion, right, you would expect that things such as churches and Masonic lodges and stuff, there would be a godliness to them because these are, men and women who've, worked their way close to God through studying the scripture and through their practices and everything. And so each of these buildings and these institutions would be kind of radiating divine truth. And if we want to get close to God, we would go to those institutions. We'd go to the temple, go to the church, go to the lodge, wherever to get close to God. But in an inverted world, God is not to be found in temples made by human hands, right? And that's the idea, is to find it in these temples, yeah? So now in the inverted season, God can only be found within.
Yeah.
You're not going to go and you're not going to find God in some building somewhere.
And once you find it within, when you go back into those buildings, even if it's a fucking government building, which is so interesting that how do I put this? Those that are trying to impose tyranny and mind control on us are the ones occupying the buildings that were created in reverence to God, out of inspiration for God. But ultimately, when you understand all that we're discussing here, you can still look at those buildings and have a sense of awe and wonder related to them, and not look at them and say, oh, that's government occupying this. And this is obviously like at a subconscious level. Government occupies that. They are superior to me. I am inferior. I'm living in these boxes that we've all created, that have been created for us, that are made out of like some of the worst material. You get what I'm saying? It's like with a new lens, when you find God in your heart, you can look at those buildings, even with government occupying them, and be like, oh my God, this is invoking a sense of awe and wonder inside of me. And I feel the presence of God when I look at them.
Yes, because they were made for the glory of God. And, this is it. It's like when people make things usually without God in their hearts, it's imperfect, right? It's temporary. It's, not going to last forever. But when people actually make things for the glory of God, they become perfect and, eternally existing, which is like all God's creations. So a lot of these buildings, they have that. You can look at them and you can see that, you can feel from the building itself, but you're not going to get it from the people inside the building, right? They're just, office workers and, bureaucrats and stuff like that working in these buildings. But the people who built it, I feel like in a way they sort of built it for this time, so that there was some evidence of, a time when God was here on the earth and was in these institutions.
It's just wild to me that it really does exist across the earth. Like these buildings are in Australia of this same sort of Greco-Roman, I forget the other name for it, but like that same general style architecture literally across the entire earth, no matter where you go.
Yeah.
Like that is wild, dude.
Yeah.
And it's just so wild that, again, this is another example of how did I miss that when I didn't have this lens? Because it's like once you have this lens, it's like slapping you in the face. It's so obvious. Like, how is it possible that there's a uniform architectural style that exists across the earth like this? And of course, the whole idea of hammers and chisels and like built over the period that they say, like, it's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense.
Yeah. No, I totally agree, man. It's so I think, the season of deception really makes a lot of sense. But how long is the season? That is the question.
That is the question.
How short is a short season?
Right. I know everyone's speculating on that. It is interesting, like if you take the perspective that Gunnar Heinsohn, I think is his name, who says that there's 700 years just thrown into the timeline, which makes a lot of sense to me. And there's speculation that a short season, if you consider Christ's millennial reign like 1,000 years, right, then a short season of that, you could say 1/4 of that maybe, then it's only 250 years that we might be coming up on the end of that little season, right? I don't know. No one knows.
Yeah, because some people claim it was 1776 was the start, right? And now we're exactly 250 years.
250 years, dude.
From then,
It's pretty wild. I don't know, man. Maybe by the time this episode comes out, it doesn't come out, and I don't know what's going on Earth.
Well, potentially the Great Awakening and the Truth Movement, is that, that awakening returning, it sort of brought that about. I mean, like, when I was at school and we went to the careers office, did you have truther or conspiracy theorist on the list of careers?
Hell no, dude. Here we are.
No, it wasn't even a thing, right? When we were kids, there's no such thing as a conspiracy theorist or a truther.
No.
But when the internet age came and, again, the Ethernet, right? It's actually called the Ethernet, and started connecting everybody up and allowing us to interact and share with one another instead of just feeding off of a singular central like media source. That's what led to truthers and, conspiracy theorists and here we are.
Here we are, man. Do you ever think you'd be sitting in Austin, Texas, having a conversation about this? What if I told you that 10 years ago? You'd be like, what the hell are you talking about? Same with me, man. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's a really exciting time, man. And, the world sure is a scary place and there's lots of deceptions. But, I mean, again, with the deception thing, as you well know, a lot of it is just offers. Right. It's not like they're like coming after you and, chasing you down. And it's like they're just offering you things. And so the choice always lies with you. It's like a test.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think more and more so now, too. I think like it's becoming, obviously there's examples where they will infringe and impose upon you. But then I also question like, your orientation in relation to that experience. Is this something that was still divinely orchestrated for your benefit? Like there's a lot of questions surrounding that, but overwhelmingly, I think as time has gone on, it's becoming even more and more apparent that they really are just offers, and you don't have to accept the offer. You don't have to take the bait on that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think the more people are starting to realize that, no, we actually do have a choice when it comes to a lot of this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, we essentially given godlike powers to the government.
Yeah.
And kind of
which is not a
that.
thing. It's not a person. It's comprised of men and women. We forget that.
Yeah.
We talk about the government as if it's an entity. It's not really, maybe in a thought form, egregore sense, but it's not an actual person.
Yeah, it's just men and women doing jobs.
Yeah, that's it, dude, that they hate. I was in the government, I can say that. Yeah. You know what I mean? It was like...
And then so you're submitting to men and women who are doing jobs because you think that they have some, they're like some grand body of, like you're a part of, I mean, that's the way I saw the government growing up. It was like, you sort of felt safe, having the government there. You thought they had your best interests at heart. And, of course, all those illusions got broken during COVID. So yeah, that's a big part of it, reclaiming your sovereignty and, learning to find God within.
Yeah, man.
You can't outsource it.
No, you can't. I have one more topic that I want to discuss, if it's cool with you, and it's alchemy as it relates to the human body, if we could. I know we touched on it briefly in this one and a little bit in the last episode, but I want to speak to it more directly, like how an understanding of alchemy has helped you from a health perspective.
Well, it greatly simplifies the human body for a start, when you're coming from a physics perspective, right? So it's a bunch of atoms all hanging together by forces. It's 99.9% empty space, all this kind of thing. It's when things go wrong with your body, and then I'm reaching for atomic theory to try and understand what's happening.
Well, then you just outsource to the quote-unquote experts who know the atomic theory and then the medicine that's created off of it, because it's like, this is too complex. I have no idea what's going on inside of me. I need to turn to the people who understand all the atomic happenings inside of me.
Yeah, and medicine has us believing that health is given by synthetic molecules, so... Yeah, so I mean, coming back to the elements then, well, you can sort of break it down into fire, earth, air, and water. The dry solid matter in your body would be the earth, and then the fluids would be the water. And then the air, of course, you're breathing in at all times. And then the fire would be your divine spark and the part that like moves you. And then the ether would be the sort of observing, controlling consciousness that's, accessing that. So, I mean, I've been doing a lot of work to try and reframe a lot of health and biology stuff in terms of the four elements, because I think it just greatly simplifies our understanding. And of course, and with the idea that the human body is divinely created in the image of God, it's actually perfect for what it does. And, God gives us the opportunity to go against him. Right, and that's right there from the beginning of the Bible. It's like Adam and Eve. You live in paradise. You can walk with God. You can talk to the animals. You can have it all, or you can do that one thing that I told you not to do.
Your choice.
It's your choice.
Yeah.
And so I see it as God loves us so much that He gives us the freedom to disobey. And of course, many people choose to disobey, and then they suffer. And they wonder, why am I suffering? Oh, I'm a victim. I'm being attacked by a virus, or, I just have bad luck, or, whatever it is. It's like, but when you actually start pulling yourself closer to God, it's, you get synchronicities, your prayers get answered, and, things start to happen that you just can't explain with any other means other than, that's God or the angels helping you out, So, yeah, it's really just pull me back. My health has improved massively since I started thinking along these lines, and I'm not afraid of health problems and that kind of thing. I mean, things come up, of course, but you deal with them just from that perspective that your body is able to take care of everything. Your body is able to handle it and regenerate, and it's always working to heal. And you just got to get out the way.
Yeah. Do you look at it sometimes as like a rebalancing of the elements? Like if you have like too much fire in your gut, in air quotes, like almost like from a traditional Chinese medicine lens?
Well, yeah, they have the four humors in alchemy. So that's, like your blood, your bile. So you got yellow bile and black bile. And what's the other one that I've forgotten? Phlegm. Uh-huh. Yeah. So those, it's really interesting when you dig into those. I mean, the bile thing, for example, so the yellow bile is associated with the fire element. So against the yellow, that sulfur color, right? It's like a sort of corrosive. It's able to like break down fats. But then you have black bile, which they say is stored in the spleen. Black bile, so yellow bile is hot and dry, and black bile is cold and dry. And they say black bile they say it has stuff to do with memory and wisdom, but also it can be released into the body to stimulate appetite. And so, for example, like how does black bile make you hungry? Well, because it's cold and dry. So when you have cold and dry humor into your system, then you crave hot and wet.
Yeah.
And what's hot and wet? So that's food.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. So, one way I was thinking of it was actually in terms of cannabis, like vaping, right? So people vape or smoke cannabis and they get the munchies. Well, if you think when you're smoking, it's hot and dry, yeah, and then it goes in your body and then the heat is taken out of it, and then it's now cold and dry.
Yeah.
So you're taking in something hot and dry, it becomes cold and dry, and so then you get the munchies, which is you get the hot and wet.
Makes a lot of sense
to balance out the cold and dry.
Are you sure it's not like the THC molecule binding to what it
binding to receptors, yeah, to your hunger receptors or something? Yeah, it's.
No, it just makes it so much more simple, man.
Yeah. I think that whole receptor theory is just kind of a way of making you feel that your body is designed to receive drugs.
Yeah. Totally.
Specifically has receptors for those specific pharmaceuticals and everything.
It's so tough, man, because like when I interview other people on the show, I've said this before, when they say things like cannabis receptor, it's like I think I know what they mean, what they don't even realize they're meaning, if that makes sense. It's kind of like when you go to a church service, and I've had this experience with my wife. We've gone to church a few times over the past 2 years, and we have this experience where like, I think the pastor doesn't even know what he's really meaning. He thinks it's something else, but it's like what he's meaning is actually really profound, but it's not what he's actually meaning it to mean. Does that make sense? And it's similar with this receptor thing. I'm like, You're basically saying that our body is intelligent and it can receive these quote unquote chemicals and interact with them. That doesn't mean we have a fucking receptor. Like, show me the receptor.
No, I think with drugs, I mean, look, it's just a substance that dissolves in the blood.
Yeah.
And then that changes the character of your blood, and you experience that as, the trip or whatever it is. It's like you're experiencing your blood.
Yeah.
And then it will eventually break down and be passed, and then it will wear off. But yeah, the idea that the molecule is coming in and like gripping onto some receptor, and then that's, causing the experience.
No.
I don't think there's any evidence for that whatsoever.
No, there's not, man. Oh, man. Anything else you wanted to share, discuss?
Well, no, I'll just mention a bit what I've got going on at the moment. I spent the winter like gathering together all my life's work into something I call the fruit basket. So this is the fruits of my labor. This quote from Jesus Christ, "Ye shall know them by their fruits," has been a big influence on me. And, I've created a lot of things over the years, but I'm the kind of guy that I'll like create something and then release it and then forget about it and then create something else. But this year I was 48 years old, and I just started looking back on everything I've created over the years, all my music, all the presentations, and of course my book and audiobook and lots of different things. And I thought, I'll gather all that together into one package where people can really know me by my fruits. So that's called my fruit basket, and that's like my premium offering that I have on my website. And,
I love that.
Yeah.
Your fruit basket. I love that so much.
So that's what I'm selling at the moment. And yeah.
I love that, man. I hope people buy your fruits.
Thank you.
That's good. I'm sure there's some very like juicy fruits in that.
Yeah, there certainly is. Yeah, plenty to get your teeth into.
That's good, man. Okay, I'll throw that in the show notes for people who are listening and watching. Steve, I love you, man. You're an awesome dude to hang out with. Gotten to hang out with you on a few separate occasions now in a few different countries too, which is really cool. And I just love picking your brain on these topics because you're a wealth of knowledge and inspiration as well, man. So I appreciate you so much.
Thank you, Alec. I love you too, bro. You've been a huge inspiration, and I think you came up at a time when the world really needed some courage, and I got so much courage from listening to you and watching you, and it really helped inspire me to write my book and start speaking out on all these issues, because I was afraid to speak out for a long time, and afraid of career ending, music career ending, all this kind of stuff. What are people going to say? You're going to this and that. But when I saw guys like yourself and Dr. Kaufman and Tom Cowan and these guys just coming out and just saying it, I'm just like, this is what I have to do. So, you've been a big inspiration to me too, man.
Appreciate that, bro.
Yeah.